Chapter 1079. If you didn't marry Feng Mingzhu, who else could it be? I can't call you brother-in-law while shamelessly liking you. These two sentences repeated in his mind. At a certain moment, Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling's face and his eyes suddenly froze. A possibility that he had never thought of, or even dared to think of, was about to explode in his mind. When Mrs. Feng, Qin Xiu, and her mother saw Feng Ling for the first time, they grabbed her hand and kept asking her if she was a man or a woman and how old she was. Later, when Qin Xiu's mother met him, she casually asked him why Feng Ling didn't come and asked him a lot about Feng Ling. He used to think that the old lady only cared about Feng Ling because she had helped her. Besides, the old lady always cared about children of Feng Ling's age, so he never thought much about it. Why did Feng Ling coincidentally have the surname Feng? This surname was not common in the United States. If there was no reason, an orphan would not have such a surname. She thought he married Feng Mingzhu, so she said she wanted to call him brother-in-law. The cenotaph that he had been married to for 3 years had been decided by him and the Li family. Soon, it would be the time when he could completely regain his freedom after being married for 3 years. The poor second daughter of the Feng family fell into the sea and disappeared at the age of 1. No one believed that it was possible for a 1-year-old child to survive in the vast sea. All kinds of things condensed in Li Nanheng's mind and then exploded little by little. He looked at Feng Ling, who was sleeping, and for the first time in his life, he was so nervous and excited that his palms were sweating. It was already 6:30 a.m., and the breakfast that Xiao Su asked someone to prepare had already been delivered. Xiao Su took the dining cart and pushed it to the door. Just as he was about to knock on the door in front of him suddenly opened. He thought he came at the wrong time. Why did boss look like? Was he going to be scolded like Special Assistant Shen? However, Li Nanheng only glanced at the breakfast on the dining car and said indifferently, "When she wakes up, arrange for her to see Mrs. Mo. I'm going back to the United States." Ah. Xiao Su was startled. "Boss, haven't you already informed Mr. Mo that you will personally send Feng Ling over?" "Right now, I have something more important to do. It's about my life. I need to go back and investigate it. You stay here and watch over her. Tell Mo Jingshan that if she suffers even the slightest injury or grievance in High City, I won't care if his surname is Mo or Bai. I'll take his life all the same." Xiao Su, what the hell? A great event in one's life since ancient times, the major event in a man's life has always been getting promoted, getting rich, and getting married. He definitely didn't need to get promoted and get rich. The position of the boss was already high enough and he didn't lack money. That had to do with marrying a wife. Xiao Su looked confused, but Li Nanheng didn't wait for a moment. He walked around the dining car, brushed past Xiao Su expressionlessly, and walked out decisively. Xiao Su turned back to look at Boss Li's swift and decisive back, feeling somewhat confused. Then he pushed the dining car in, only to see that Feng Ling was still sleeping. The corner of Xiao Su's mouth twitched. He had to put the dining car aside. Thinking of what Boss Li said just now, he couldn't let Feng Ling suffer any grievances. He immediately gave up the idea of waking her up and went out to wait. Feng Ling drank on the plane yesterday and slept for the whole morning. She frowned slightly at the dazzling noon sun and turned over in bed. The sober consciousness in her mind gradually returned, and then she suddenly realized that she was on a plane and was about to go to High City. Where was she now? She abruptly opened her eyes and looked at the unfamiliar hotel room. Then, she abruptly sat up and looked around. There was no one else here. She was the only one here. Sitting on the bed for a long time, she couldn't remember how she came to the hotel. Then she looked around and found her cell phone, only to see that it was already past 12:00 in the afternoon. Did she sleep for so long? How did she get off the plane? There was a knock on the door, and at the same time, Xiao Su's voice came from outside. "Feng Ling, haven't you woken up?" Feng Ling had a headache. She raised her hand and rubbed her forehead, but she couldn't remember what had happened. She staggered up from the bed and walked to the door to open it. Seeing that she was awake, Xiao Su smiled. In the morning, before boss left, he asked me to prepare breakfast for you, but you drank too much and didn't wake up until now. Breakfast can't be eaten. I'm going to ask someone to prepare something else for you. Go wash up, and I'll call you out to eat when it's ready. Feng Ling's hand was still on her head, and she looked at him in confusion. How did I get off the plane? Do you think I carried you off the plane, or did Boss Li carry you off the plane? Xiao Su kept her in suspense. Feng Ling, she looked at Xiao Su for a while, thinking of Li Nanheng's indifferent attitude toward her recently. Did you carry me? Xiao Su looked at her exasperatedly. She was so stupid. No wonder her relationship with Boss Li was so bumpy. Boss Li didn't really intend to give her the cold shoulder. He was just angered by her. Couldn't she see that with Boss Li around, how could he let another man carry her? What a silly girl. Xiao Su tooted. You guessed wrong. Hurry up and wash up. I can smell the wine in your mouth when I talk to you. Feng Ling took another step back. She was slightly embarrassed by the taste of wine in her mouth, but she really didn't expect that the bottle of red wine would have such a strong after-effect. She had never fallen asleep so defenselessly and lost herself in her sleep. When Xiao Su left, she closed the door, thought about it, and turned to walk into the bathroom. When she passed by the bathroom, she glanced at the toilet in the bathroom and looked at it in confusion. She didn't know why the toilet lid was covered, but after a glance, she went straight into the bathroom. She took off her clothes and stood under the shower. When she was taking a shower, she suddenly remembered that Xiao Su said she guessed wrong. So it was Li Nanheng who carried her off the plane? Was she so drunk at that time? He came to High City with her, but in the end, he had to carry her when she was drunk. He must have been very impatient. As Feng Ling thought about it, she scratched her forehead in annoyance, feeling a little annoyed. She would never drink so much in the future. Just now, Xiao Su said that boss told him something before he left. Before he left, he meant that Li Nanheng left. Chapter 1080. Through Xiao Su and Shen Mu's introduction, Feng Ling was successfully introduced to Mrs. Mo's side. Unlike the young and ignorant children in Mr. Ted's family, Jean Wan did not trust Mrs. Mo so easily. However, after interacting with her for a short period of time, Jean Wan had gradually grown accustomed to and trusted Feng Ling's character. What kind of woman was Jean Wan? Feng Ling did not know how to describe it. She could only say that everything Jean Wan had, Feng Ling did not, and everything Feng Ling had, Jean Wan did not. Their tempers complemented each other miraculously. Feng Ling did not speak much, but she was very responsible as Mrs. Mo's bodyguard. Jean Wan would often tug on Feng Ling's emotions to chat with her. Most of the time, Jean Wan was the only one talking. Even if Feng Ling did not speak, she would quietly listen and watch from the side. In Jean Wan and Mr. Mo's marriage and relationship, Feng Ling saw many things that she had never imagined. For example, it turned out that a man and a woman could really have such strong feelings for each other. For example, feelings could not be ended after a conversation. Many people were unswervingly faithful in their marriages and relationships. They did not just fall in love once, but for a lifetime. Mr. Mo's feelings for Jean Wan, even if he never said it out loud, Feng Ling could tell from their relationship that they were going to be together forever and ever. In addition to staying by Jean Wan's side every day and guarding outside her studio, Feng Ling would occasionally take an hour or two to go to the MO Corporation to meet the brothers from 11 Base who had been sent here. However, she had never seen these brothers in 11 Base before and didn't know which team they were from. Judging from their martial arts skills, they were indeed very good. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been sent to work for Mr. Mo. Half a month after Feng Ling arrived in High City, she went to Mo Corporation again. The moment she entered, she saw a man with a crew cut waving at her. Come here. After settling her down, Xiao Su returned to the United States. Recently, Feng Ling didn't have any acquaintances around her. She saw that the other party was wearing a black suit, but there was a small 11 logo on his chest. After confirming that he was from 11 base, Feng Ling approached him. The man saw her approach and grinned at her. "What's wrong? Don't you remember me?" Feng Ling glanced at him in confusion. "Remember what? We've met?" "TSK, little junior sister Feng Ling, your memory is really bad. Back then, when you entered 11 base at the age of 13, I was still in Team 1. At that time, Old Han often called you to Team 1 to secretly learn from them. I passed you mineral water many times, but you actually don't remember?" Feng Ling stood there in a daze for a long while before she remembered. "If that's the case, I do have some impression of you. But when I entered Team 1, it seemed that you were already. I've been following Mr. Mo since a long time ago. We were all together with Mr. Mo, but we never expected that a skinny little fellow like you would really be a woman. Last time, when our people brought you back from the airport, I took a glance at you. When I confirmed that you were indeed Feng Ling, I was surprised for quite a while. However, after hearing Brother Su's brief explanation of your situation, I felt sorry for you. You didn't have anyone to rely on when you were young. You wanted to find a place to settle down, so you pretended to be a man. It wasn't easy for you." Feng Ling was very pleased that others understood her, but she was not used to talking about her sufferings and her past, so she didn't say anything. But this was also good. In the future, she would at least have some friends here. It was not bad for him to call her little junior sister. After all, they were both from Team 1, and the drill master was also Han Jin. It was not strange for him to call her little junior sister. Before she could think of anything else, she suddenly felt a weight on her shoulder. The other party had already placed a hand on her shoulder. As if they were good brothers, he announced to the brothers behind him, "From now on, this is everyone's little junior sister. Don't be fooled by her thin figure. In fact, she is very skilled. Let me tell you, don't offend her." Among this group of people were not only the people from 11 base but also several bodyguards from MO Corporation. Anyway, they were all capable people. Feng Ling was a little embarrassed by this introduction and didn't speak much throughout the whole process. However, as soon as this man finished speaking, more than a dozen strong men rushed forward and surrounded Feng Ling. They excitedly extended their hands to introduce themselves. "My name is Zhao Hans Han. My name is Hao Bing. My name is Zhou Yang." The man who put his arm around her shoulder and called her little junior sister was called Bai Kai. Others called him Bai Kai Shui. These strong men were all more than 1.8 meters tall. They pressed down on her from all directions. For the first time, Feng Ling felt a little suffocated standing among this group of people with her height of 1.7 meters. Bai Kai chuckled. "Little junior sister Feng Ling, don't be so reserved." Before Xiao Su left, he specially said that if you lose a single hair or suffer a little grievance in High City, Boss Li can come over and destroy our entire team. These words may not seem to carry much weight, but when you think about it carefully, it is really scary. Boss Li has already mentioned it. If anyone dares to touch you, they will simply be going against the entire 11 base, and our Mr. Mo, don't worry, we will definitely dote on you and not let anyone bully you. Hearing this, the few strong men surrounded her even more tightly, almost blocking the group of people from the MO Corporation from taking another look at her, as if they didn't want to let other passers-by from the MO Corporation look at her. What a joke. Their 11 base and the MO Corporation's bodyguard team only had these few people, and they were all men. It was rare for a woman to sneak in, and she was so beautiful. They definitely couldn't let others take this piece of meat away. Regardless of Boss Li and Xiao Su's warning, this little junior sister belonged to them. No one else should even think about taking a second look at her. Feng Ling had been in High City for half a month. Previously, she had been staying by Jin Wan's side. She didn't expect that she would encounter such an enthusiastic situation when she just came to the MO Corporation to take a look. Mr. Mo was still in a meeting, and she had nothing to do. She could only deal with these people and then kept hearing their words in her ears. In fact, what Feng Ling really wanted to say was that in this world, the person who could easily bully her should not have been born yet. Even when she was in various dangerous places where the terrorists were, it was at most a little dangerous. It was not so easy to bully her. Please remember this book's domain name. 4M. Chapter 1081. The MO Corporation looked tall, cold, and solemn, but the security room on the first floor was particularly lively. Many passers-by came in to watch and asked what was going on. Several big men simply shielded Fong Ling behind them. Who dared to take a second look at the person Mr. Lee had told them not to bully? We haven't seen any women in our base before. Now the only junior sister has been assigned to High City. I don't know if we can increase our luck in love affairs if we suddenly have a woman by our side. It doesn't feel good to be single for so many years. That's right. Junior sister, you've been by Mrs. Mo's side every day. Have you met any suitable little sisters to introduce to us? Fong Ling, while they were laughing, someone outside suddenly gave them a look. The few strong men looked outside and immediately restrained their smiles. All of them instantly became serious. Fong Ling paused and turned to see Mo Jingshan's figure. It seemed that he had just passed by. Hearing the laughter inside, he turned his head and glanced in this direction. It wasn't that she hadn't been in contact with Mr. Mo these days, but it was the first time that she had such a face-to-face contact in the company. Usually, Mr. Mo was definitely a wife-doting maniac, but in the company, he was obviously an incorruptible and cold-blooded boss. However, no matter where Mr. Mo was, he was still a handsome man. In Fong Ling's eyes, Mr. Mo was a man who wouldn't show anything but had his own control. No one could detect anything from him in the blink of an eye, but in his hands, many things had already been turned upside down in the blink of an eye, and no one could resist him. However, such a man who looked as gentle as jade but was actually very dangerous really doted on his wife to an amazing extent. In the short half a month she had been in High City, whenever she met Dr. Chin, he would teasingly ask her, "Have you been fed too much dog food by the Mo couple?" Indeed, Fong Ling, who was as calm as water, felt quite full. Hearing Dr. Chin's complaints, it seemed that he had suffered a lot of dog food. Mo Jingshan glanced at Fong Ling and turned to speak to Shenmu. Shenmu nodded respectfully and quickly walked out of the company's main entrance. They couldn't see what special assistant Shen was doing from here, but Mr. Mo didn't seem to be in a hurry to go out. Fong Ling, Mo Jingshan's voice rang out. "Why aren't you at Jinlin building?" Suddenly being called, Fong Ling walked out. "Mr. Mo, Mrs. Mo just had a meeting in the studio. I saw that she was taking a nap in the break room, so I came here for a walk. When I came here half a month ago, I still had a lot of things to hand over and needed to report here." Afternoon nap. Mo Jingshan's clear brows were calm and peaceful. The studio is peaceful today. No one went to cause trouble. No, the previous incident with CEO Jean has already been resolved. They don't have the guts to cause trouble again. Mrs. Mo is very clever. She is also very careful in choosing her investors and clients. Aside from the external dangers that you told me about, there won't be any trouble at her place. I'll be watching over her. Mr. Mo, don't worry. Mo Jingshan looked at her and mildly curved his lips. Just when Fong Ling thought that the questioning was over and he was about to leave, the man's low and mild voice suddenly landed in her ears. "Next week is Nan Heng's birthday. It's been so many years since we can gather together in High City. Let's find a place to drink a few books. Come with Jean Wan." When Fong Ling heard the two words, Nan Heng, her expression did not change. She was silent for 2 seconds before saying calmly, "I'll send Mrs. Mo over safely." She said to send Jean Wan over, not to accompany her in. Mo Jingshan looked at her again. He did not say much, nor did he say anything. He just smiled and left. After Mo Jingshan left, Fong Ling raised her eyes to look at the man's tall and straight back. Her heart churned with displeasure. How on earth did Li Nanheng manage to make everyone around her seem to know that there was a connection between them? This group of people didn't dare to touch her and seemed to be really caring for her, but she didn't need such care, and it was clear that even if she didn't say anything, the words, Li Nanheng's property, were engraved on her head. She had already hidden in High City. Did this man still have a way to control everything about her? America, Los Angeles. Many years ago, in that orphanage, the principal, several aunties, and teachers all wore expressions of shock and bewilderment. 11 Base had not come to their orphanage for a long time. Nowadays, 11 Base was no longer a place where just anyone could sneak into. There was no longer the rule of selecting members from various orphanages every few years like in the past. It was rare that Mr. Li suddenly came in person, but he actually asked them for the blood sample of the child named Feng Ling. Because the identity of orphans was relatively special, no matter who they were, as long as they had been adopted in the orphanage, a tube or two of their blood would be drawn and kept for convenience in finding their parents or for other purposes. However, it was not easy to find Feng Ling's blood sample. Although they did draw her blood back then, she was a very unique existence in the orphanage. In addition, she was already 12 years old when she entered the orphanage. She was not the kind of child who was easy to discipline. In fact, the orphanage had been considering whether to keep her or not, so her blood sample was not placed together with the other children's but separately placed outside. Later, the previous principal changed, and it was not easy to investigate what happened back then. They also did not know where Feng Ling's blood sample was. However, after so many years, Mr. Li came in person and asked for Feng Ling's blood sample. How could they find it? However, it was clear that Mr. Li would not easily let go of the orphanage. He was determined to get to the bottom of what had happened to Feng Ling in the orphanage. Although the principal was no longer around, some of the aunties and teachers who had come into contact with Feng Ling were still here. After a careful investigation, he finally found out what kind of life Feng Ling had led in the orphanage for a year. A 12-year-old child was injected with a tranquilizer every day and locked in a small dark room. With every minute that he heard, Li Nanheng's eyes turned colder. Please remember this book's domain name. 4M. Chapter 1082. After 2 or 3 days, this group of people finally found some worn-out bottles with blood samples in the abandoned warehouse of the orphanage. After comparing them one by one, they finally confirmed Feng Ling's blood. After receiving the blood sample belonging to Feng Ling, Li Nanheng saw the word Feng Ling written under the white sticker that had turned yellow and peeling. The old color piled up in a certain place was very obvious. Even though it was too old, it could still be used to check DNA. If he really wanted to check Feng Ling's DNA, he could just pluck a strand of her hair. At this moment, Li Nanheng stood here and took away everything that Feng Ling had left here one by one. Looking at the pitiful amount of things, he didn't know what he was thinking. But there was a piece missing, and the pain was excruciating. If he had discovered her earlier and taken her away, instead of letting her disguise herself as a man and live cautiously every day, perhaps she wouldn't have become so stubborn and cautious. Perhaps if he had let her feel the warmth between people earlier, her heart wouldn't have been so cold and hard, so cold that it was hard for him to melt. Li Nanheng walked out with the blood sample that Feng Ling had left behind. When he passed by the abandoned small building that he had once walked by, his eyes suddenly turned in the direction of the door. Back then, it was through this door. She was inside. He was outside. The director of the orphanage and a group of people stood behind. Seeing Mr. Li stand by the abandoned small building for a long time and finally leave with an unclear expression, the group of people trembled with fear, but they didn't dare to say a word. Jean Lin Building. Jean Wan had just gone to a meeting. When she came out, she saw that Feng Ling was still standing outside. Feng Ling, usually when I'm working or in a meeting, even if you don't go in, you should find a place to sit down and rest. Don't always stand outside like this. Aren't your legs tired? Feng Ling said calmly, It's fine. I'm used to it. Jean Wan had clearly long adapted to Feng Ling's indifferent personality. Seeing her indifferent expression, Jean Wan smiled. At this moment, Xiaoba had just made 2 cups of milk tea. She handed one to Jin Wan and one to Feng Ling, saying with a worshipping expression, "Feng Ling, drink milk tea." Feng Ling glanced at Xiaoba and then at the cup of milk tea. "Thank you, but I won't drink it." Little 8 puffed up her cheeks. "I specially made it for you." Seeing Xiaoba's stubborn expression, Feng Ling hesitated for a moment before taking it. She simply thanked him. "Thank you." Xiaoba then turned to tell Jin Wan about her work, looking back at Feng Ling from time to time. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't drink the milk tea, she turned her head and said, "It's really delicious. Give me some face and try it." Feng Ling, she didn't usually drink this stuff. Seeing little 8's expression, she had no choice but to take a sip. It was very sweet and tasted a little like cocoa. She pursed her lips again and said, delicious." Xiaoba immediately chuckled. When Xiaoba turned to do other things, Jin Wan saw that Feng Ling was still holding the cup of milk tea in her hand. She smiled and reached out to take it and then put it on the windowsill. "All right, if you don't want to drink it, you don't have to force yourself. You don't know, ever since someone came to the studio to make trouble and was dealt with by you with just a few punches and kicks, Xiaoba's admiration for you is like a surging river. You are now her idol, so it's inevitable that she will think of you no matter what she does." Feng Ling looked at Jin Wan and didn't say much about Xiaoba's matter. She just said, "By the way, Mrs. Mo, Mr. Mo told you to go back early recently. Even if there are people protecting you at night, don't walk around. He told you to go back to the Yew Garden early." "Got it." Jin Wan smiled and looked at the time. "I heard that it's Nanheng's birthday in a few days. Since you came from 11 base, you should be very familiar with Nanheng, right? Let's go together then." Feng Ling remained calm. For the time being, Jin Wan didn't know what happened between Feng Ling and Nanheng. In fact, she didn't know much about Nanheng. She just got along well with Feng Ling and really liked Feng Ling. In fact, Jin Wan would often hear Xiaoba secretly muttering that Feng Ling was really very good. It would be better if Feng Ling could be more approachable and not always put on a stern face to make people not dare to approach her. Feng Ling really didn't know how to get along with others. Although Jin Wan was really good, and Xiaoba was also very cute, and she had tried her best to be easygoing, she usually couldn't find any funny points when they chatted, so Xiaoba often joked that she was a modern cold-faced heroine and something like that, a cold and powerful goddess. They were all famous terms that Feng Ling had never heard of before. But it was really easy to get along with them. Her job as a bodyguard in High City was not as dangerous as when she was in Mr. and Mrs. Ted's home. At that time, she was in Mr. and Mrs. Ted's home to prevent those terrorists from secretly attacking and opponents from taking revenge. At the same time, she was also protecting a young girl. Jin Wan was different. Jin Wan was very sensible when doing things. It was just that Mo Jingshan's background was too powerful, and many things would be slightly more complicated. In order to prevent Jin Wan from encountering any potential dangers, Mo Jingshan asked someone to accompany her by her side. Usually, when they encountered small problems, they didn't even need to take out a weapon. Just a few simple punches and kicks were enough to make those small characters suffer. 2 days later, Xiaoba suddenly stopped Feng Ling before getting off work, holding a small notebook in her hand. Looking at Xiaoba, who looked cute but was actually older than her by 2 years, Feng Ling raised her brows. "What's the matter?" Xiaoba grinned, revealing her 2 little canine teeth. "Aren't the 3 big bosses going to gather soon? Mr. Mo and Dr. Qin are the 2 legends of High City. Boss Nanheng is also the boss of the legendary 11 base under the United Nations, which is even more powerful than the military. As for CEO G's side, I think if I raise this request, she will definitely slap me to death. Feng Ling, you see, when I make CEO G coffee and milk tea every day, I will specially bring some for you. Seeing how well I treat you, can you help me get an autograph from these bosses?" Feng Ling looked at Xiaoba's infatuated expression and expressionlessly pushed her head away. You're afraid that Mrs. Mo will slap you to death, but aren't you afraid that I'll slap you to death? You won't be so heartless. Perhaps because Feng Ling always gave off a neutral feeling that made people feel reliant, Xiaoba couldn't help but act spoiled. Feng Ling's expression did not change. No, I'm even more heartless. It's been a long time since I asked for monthly votes. It's the end of the month, I'm asking for monthly votes. Also, dear friends, remember to make time every day to help Qing Qing fight for the Chinese romance finals, hee hee. Please remember this book's domain name. 4M. Chapter 1083. Xiao Ba immediately cried. If you really can't do it, I just want an autograph. You are so familiar with Boss Nanheng. Is his autograph okay? Thinking of how it took her several days to get his autograph, Feng Ling's expression darkened. No. Xiao Ba gently tugged at her sleeves. Good Feng Ling. Feng Ling looked at her fangirl expression speechlessly and raised her hand to avoid her. Impossible. Seeing that Feng Ling was really determined and showed no signs of compromise, Xiao Ba sighed. You see, I'm by Mrs. Mo's side every day, but I haven't even seen Mr. Mo's face. Even if I saw him once, it was just a hurried glance. It's like you finally met a god, but because of your poor eyesight, you can't even see what the god looks like. It's such a pity. I just want an autograph. After staying by Mrs. Mo's side for a long time, you'll see what you should see with your own eyes. Mr. Mo just rarely comes to the studio here. Mrs. Mo is too busy now, and there are few opportunities for her to take you to the Mo Corporation. If you really want to see him, I'll take you with me when I go to the Mo Corporation. Xiao Ba looked at her in surprise for a while and suddenly hugged her arm excitedly. Aya, you're not so cold-hearted. Look, you can even say that you want to take me to the Mo Corporation. It means that in fact, Feng Ling, you have already regarded me as a friend, right? Feng Ling silently watched the girl who suddenly leaned over to hug her arm. She resisted for a long time and did not push her away. She might really have to change her bad habit of not liking being touched by others. I don't have to see him. Anyway, these people are all gods in my eyes. It's enough to have an autograph. Besides, he is CEO G's husband. I can smell the immortal aura from CEO G every day. Xiao Ba said softly. But Dr. Qin and Boss Nanheng are different. I can't even come into contact with them usually. Feng Ling pursed her lips and said lightly, I don't come into contact with them either. Xiao Ba didn't know much about 11 base, but seeing that Feng Ling had never mentioned anything about Nanheng, she believed her and looked at her. Don't tell me you didn't even see Boss Nanheng when you were in 11 base? Feng Ling remained calm. He is the boss of the base. I'm just a member being trained. How can I have the opportunity to see him? All right. Xiao Ba really believed her. On the plane from Los Angeles to High City, Li Nanheng was holding a stack of DNA investigation materials that only he had seen from beginning to end. The man's fingers slowly clicked on the black leather wallet that contained the information in his hand, and there was an unfathomable and meaningful smile on his lips. If he had known that everything was already predestined, he would have married his little wife a long time ago. She was unwilling to return to the Feng family and face her own background. Sure. But she had to face the fact that she was destined to be his woman in every aspect. Li Nanheng's lips were stained with a faint smile that even he himself did not notice. He looked back at the vast clear sky outside the window. Little wife, after running around for so long, it's time to pull in the net. Feng Ling sneezed. Jean Wan, who was sitting in the car, turned to look at Feng Ling who was driving. You caught a cold? No. Feng Ling continued driving and glanced at the time. Zijingqing Clubhouse is still a few kilometers away from here. We're almost there, but we're already a little late today. Mr. Mo should have already told him. It's all right. I can't avoid work. They'll understand if I go after I'm done with my work. Besides, it's Nanheng's birthday. I'm not as close as those brothers. If I really go, I'll probably just eat and drink the whole time. Jean Wan glanced at the time as she spoke. Come in with me in a while. Feng Ling did not answer. After the car arrived at Zijingqing Clubhouse, Jean Wan walked in front, and Feng Ling followed behind. As they walked, she paid attention to the crowd around to check if there were any suspicious people. She sent Jean Wan to the door of the private room, but Feng Ling stood outside the door and did not enter. Jean Wan looked back at her. Let's go in together. No, I'm not used to this kind of scene. Mrs. Mo, you go in by yourself. Feng Ling took a step back, her expression calm. Although Jean Wan did not understand the matter between her and Nanheng, she could roughly see that Feng Ling seemed to be a little uncomfortable. She glanced at her a few more times before nodding. All right, I'll go in first. When Jean Wan entered, she suddenly felt that Nanheng seemed to be in a good mood today. It was rare for him to be a little more talkative. She had seen him a few times in the past, but it seemed that this person was especially cold and difficult to approach, and she could not speak much to him. When Jean Wan walked in, Nanheng turned his eyes to the door and saw Feng Ling, who was dutifully standing outside with several other bodyguards. What are you standing outside for? Come in. Nanheng lowered his voice and sounded like an order. Jean Wan also turned back to look at Feng Ling. Yes, come in. It's not like you're an outsider. Feng Ling still stood outside the door and did not speak. Her gaze swept past Nanheng's face, but it was just a very indifferent glance. She did not have any intention of greeting him and shifted her gaze back to Jean Wan. This kind of occasion is not suitable for me, Mrs. Mo. I'll wait outside. Call me if there's anything. With that, she directly closed the door from outside. Afterward, Enchanting sat by the side and watched as the Mo couple frantically displayed their affection. Li Nanheng's expression was dark as he watched the couple displaying their affection. It was as though he wanted to cut the two of them into pieces. However, the brothers were always evenly matched. Just when Enchanting thought he was just watching the show, Nanheng was already prepared. A certain woman suddenly appeared at this small birthday party. The smile on Enchanting's face instantly disappeared, and he directly picked up his coat and left without looking back. The result was that in the end, it turned back to Nanheng standing by the side and watching the show. He did not suffer at all. Jean Wan was drunk because of a cake with a lot of cherry wine. Mo Jingshan helped her back. At this time, Feng Ling reappeared by the side. Mr. Mo, I'll send you and Mrs. Mo back. No, the Yu Garden is very close to here, Mo Jingshan said mildly. Nanheng also drank a lot of wine. Send him back. Li Nanheng leaned against the door in a somewhat drunken state and quietly glanced in her direction. Feng Ling's expression did not change. She was silent for about a few seconds before replying, all right, Mr. Mo. When Mo Jingshan carried Jean Wan away, Feng Ling stood still and calmly looked at the man leaning against the door. Can you still walk by yourself? Chapter 1084. Li Nanheng glanced at her without batting an eyelid. He looked at her with a pair of eyes that were half awake and half drunk. His eyes were so deep and dark that Feng Ling turned her head away and did not look at him again. The man looked at her and said, I don't know. I can probably walk. As he spoke, he took a step back from the wall. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, or if he really couldn't stand properly, but he suddenly staggered 2 steps to her side. Suddenly, almost half of his body weight fell on her. Feng Ling was caught off guard by his sudden fall. She quickly raised her hand to support him, but she was still forced to take 2 steps back. She was almost pressed against the wall by him. Fortunately, she reacted quickly. Feng Ling frowned because of the smell of alcohol on the man's body. She supported his chest with both hands and then raised her hand to support his arm. She turned to look at Li Nanheng, who seemed to be unable to support his body, and lowered his head. Against the light, she couldn't see his expression, but the smell of alcohol on his body was indeed strong. The man didn't speak again but leaned most of his body weight on her. Fong Ling wanted to say something, but seeing that he smelled of alcohol, she felt that there was no need to say anything. She turned to see that Mr. Mo's men had left, leaving only the two of them, so she could only help him out. When they reached the door, the wind outside blew. Obviously, Li Nanheng was drunk. He looked for the car key on his body and staggered toward the parking lot. Although he was drunk, it was a little difficult for her to suddenly hold him back with his strength. Fong Ling rushed to hold his arm. "Don't go over. How can you drive like this? I'll send you back." Li Nanheng acted as if he didn't hear her. He raised his hand to wave her hand away and was about to walk to his car. Fong Ling looked back and saw that Jin Wan's car had also been driven away by the bodyguards. She felt a little strange. If Mrs. Mo knew that she was still here, she definitely wouldn't be so ruthless and drive away the car. After all, she could take Mr. Mo's car back. But now everyone was gone, and only Li Nanheng's car was left. Fong Ling glanced at the parking lot. Although she was puzzled, she still raised her hand to grab the car key from Li Nanheng's hand and then helped him to walk toward the jeep. As they walked, she said, "Where do you live now? I'll drive your car back." The man who fell on her did not speak, but his head leaned toward her. Fong Ling frowned and raised her hand to push his head aside. However, she was pushed so hard that the man staggered forward and almost fell on the car. Fong Ling hurriedly reached out to hold him. As soon as she did, the man subconsciously grabbed her arm and abruptly pulled her in front of him. Because of the sudden strength of his hand, Fong Ling fell forward. As she fell against the car door, her back was suddenly pressed tightly by the man. He was behind her, firmly imprisoning her between his chest and the car door. Fong Ling's face was pressed against the cold car window. Her mind was particularly clear. She was about to kick him back when the man seemed to inadvertently block her leg with one leg. At the same time, he pressed her down and rested his chin on her shoulder. He abruptly hugged her from behind with a drunken look. Li Nanheng. Only then did Fong Ling realize that something was wrong. Her expression turned ugly, but being imprisoned by the man behind her, she couldn't turn back. She could only say coldly, "Are you pretending to be drunk?" The man behind her did not speak. He pressed down on her and held her tightly in his arms. Fong Ling suspected that this man had planned for her to send him off from the beginning. Otherwise, with his alcohol tolerance, how could he have gotten drunk after drinking for such a short while? Fong Ling wondered if this man had intended for her to send him off. "Let go of me." Fong Ling was furious. "Let go." The man moved, but he seemed to inadvertently rub his slightly stubbled chin against the skin on the back of her neck, causing goosebumps to rise all over Fong Ling's body. She couldn't bear it any longer and wanted to bend her arm to hit his abdomen to push him away. However, the man was still able to resolve all of her next moves. When she bent her arm, he seemed to inadvertently hold her arm, not allowing her to exert any strength. When she moved her leg, his leg firmly pressed against hers, not giving her any chance to struggle. Li Nanheng. Fong Ling was really angry. She pressed her face against the car window and said coldly, "Don't mess around in public. Let go of me." The man lowered his head to the back of her neck and said hoarsely with a hint of drunkenness, "How am I messing around? Do you mean that if this isn't a public place, I can mess around with you?" Fong Ling furrowed her brows. She exerted some strength behind her but was still held by him. She angrily twisted her body between his arms and the car door. Her fingers that were held firmly in the man's palm also dug hard into his palm. Suddenly, she saw a car driving by. The headlights of the car were slightly dazzling. She instinctively turned her head away. Li Nanheng seemed to know that her eyes were dazzled by the light. In order to let her turn her head away smoothly, he slightly relaxed his strength. She immediately took advantage of his relaxation and suddenly pulled her hand out. She turned around abruptly and looked directly at the man in front of her. She raised her leg and was about to kick him when she suddenly saw the dark light in the man's slightly drunken eyes. He lowered his eyes to look at her. His eyes were very dark, but in the darkness, there seemed to be light. She suddenly choked back the curse that was about to come out of her mouth. She only looked at him coldly. However, the man in front of her only lowered his head to look at her. As though he felt more comfortable because she turned around, he pressed her against the car door. He lowered his eyes to stare at her and then at her lips that were pursed into a line due to anger. His eyes darkened even more, and he slowly lowered his head to her lips. Fong Ling's heart skipped a beat. Just as he was about to kiss her recklessly, she abruptly turned her head away to avoid him. The man did not change because of her movements. However, when Fong Ling thought that he might kiss her face, the man suddenly tilted his head and fell forward on her. His head rested on the other side of her shoulder and almost all the weight of his body was about to directly press her down. Fong Ling subconsciously rushed to support him and then abruptly pushed him forward by an arm's length. She watched as the man swayed as though he was half drunk and half awake, but also seemed to be so drunk that he couldn't stand steadily. Her teeth were itching with hatred. Chapter 1085. She remembered how she had been ignored by him in the base for so many days in order to get his signature. She remembered how she had spent more than 10 hours on the plane to avoid the awkwardness of being with him. She remembered how she hadn't seen him in the past few days in the sea. Today, he had used his birthday as an excuse to appear, but he was so drunk that he even wanted her to send him home. Fong Ling lifted her foot and kicked his calf hard to vent her anger. The man frowned innocently because of her kick. He staggered forward unsteadily and pounced on her again, pressing her firmly against the car door. His tall body bowed, and he rested his head on her shoulder, not moving. Fong Ling, although Li Nanheng was shameless, he shouldn't be this shameless. He should be really drunk. She pushed him a few more times. Seeing that he seemed to be dead drunk, Fong Ling supported him with a dark expression and took 2 steps back. She pressed the electronic car key in her hand, opened the car door at the back, and stuffed him in. The woman's movements were not gentle at all. In fact, it was frighteningly rough. Li Nanheng staggered when he was pushed in. No matter how big the car was, the man was tall. When she pushed him in, his head hit the other side of the car door. Fong Ling ignored him completely. After shoving his long legs in, she slammed the car door. After closing the car door, Fong Ling stood outside the door and looked at the black Jeep in front of her. This was the car that Li Nanheng liked. He didn't stay in High City for long and specially bought a car. Did he plan to come to High City often? Previously, she seemed to have heard someone say that recently, because of the underground arms business between him and Mr. Mo, he often flew over. She didn't know if it was because of this. But what was she avoiding by coming to High City, a place she was not familiar with? Fong Ling stood alone outside the car door for a while. After feeling the cold wind for a while, she felt some of her depression dissipate. She opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat. After sitting in, she looked back and saw that the man was still in the position she had shoved into the car. He had not moved. It seemed that he was really drunk. She retracted her gaze, fastened her seatbelt, and drove him to find a hotel. She didn't know where he was staying, so she could only find a hotel nearby for him to stay in. In any case, it was impossible for her to bring him to where she was staying now. She couldn't do something like inviting a wolf into her house. Even if this wolf seemed to have become a cold wolf in recent months, it was still a wolf. Fong Ling drove the car to a 5-star hotel closest to the Ion Zijing Qing clubhouse. She didn't have much of a concept of a 7-star hotel, but this hotel looked pretty good. She parked the car in the opposite parking lot and opened the back door. She looked at the man who was still lying there and reached out to help him up. It was at this moment that Fong Ling discovered that it was much more difficult to help a drunken man out of the car than to carry a 300-pound sandbag and run. She spent a lot of effort to help him up, but the man placed all his weight on her shoulders. When she finally managed to pull him out of the car, the man staggered and leaned against her, allowing her to support him. The smell of alcohol on his body was close to her nose, causing her to feel a little irritated. After locking the car, she supported him toward the main entrance of the hotel. She wasn't far from the hotel's main entrance. Walking 100 meters was more strenuous than walking a mile. She really couldn't tell if he was doing it on purpose or if people were like this when they were drunk. He looked like he couldn't wait to crush her to death. When she finally entered the hotel, the staff in the lobby saw her supporting a tall man and hurriedly stepped forward to help her. However, Li Nanheng glanced coldly at an angle that Feng Ling couldn't see. At the same time, he raised his hand to hold her waist and even bent his body to press his head tightly against her neck, looking cold and indifferent as though no one except for her was close to him. Feng Ling didn't see his expression. She only felt that this man seemed to want to tie her up with his arms. She lowered her head to glance at him strangely but couldn't see his face or his expression. She only saw that for some reason, the staff who were about to come over to help suddenly retreated as though they didn't dare to come over. Feng Ling found it strange. Could it be that he had stayed in this hotel before and these people recognized him and didn't dare to touch him? Feng Ling couldn't figure it out. This man was really too heavy. She helped him to the elevator and said, "Help me get a room first. After I help him in and let him lie down, I'll come down and give you his identity card." "All right, miss, please wait a moment." Smelling the smell of alcohol on the tall and handsome man she was supporting, the staff at the front desk smiled at her understandingly and then asked the security guard to help her press the elevator button. At the same time, she reminded, "Please come down as soon as possible to apply for a new identity card. We see that it's too difficult for you to support him, so we made an exception this time. Under normal circumstances, it's not allowed to get a room without seeing the identity card." "Got it." Feng Ling didn't say much. After the elevator door opened, she quickly helped Li Nanheng in. The security guard followed in, holding a room card in his hand. After following them to the upper floor, the elevator door opened and the security guard walked out. Seeing this was the 6th floor, Feng Ling supported him while following the security guard. When the security guard opened the door of a room, he looked back and signaled that she could help him in first. She quickly dragged Li Nanheng, the big burden, in. The man was almost tightly pressed against her. The security guard watched from outside but was too embarrassed to come over to help, so he retreated outside the door and waited for her to go out to apply for a new identity card. With great difficulty, she finally pressed Li Nanheng onto the bed. Feng Ling tripped over the man's leg and stumbled down onto him. Then she quickly lay up and looked at the man lying on the bed motionless. She secretly ground her teeth and fumbled around on his body for a while. Finally, she found where his wallet was. She was about to untie his coat to take his wallet when the man suddenly raised his hand and clasped her wrist. The man's body temperature was slightly higher because of the alcohol, and the temperature of his palm was slightly hot. Feng Ling paused and abruptly looked at the man lying on the bed. She was about to scold him for pretending to be drunk when the man did not open his eyes. He only breathed out the smell of alcohol and said hoarsely, "Don't touch me. If you touch me again, something will happen." Feng Ling, she pulled her hand out of his. She didn't even look at him to see if he was really drunk. She forcefully unbuttoned his shirt, took out his wallet, found his ID, and took out her own ID. She turned around and handed it to the security guard outside the door. She asked the security guard to help her hand it over to the front desk. "Ahaha, begging for monthly votes, begging for rankings, love you guys more and more." Chapter 1086. There are ID cards and money inside. "Bring them to the front desk and let the staff take them," Feng Ling said as she stood in front of the door. The security guard took the wallet she handed over, checked the 2 IDs, and nodded. "All right, I'll send them over for you. If there's anything, you can call the front desk." "All right, thank you." Feng Ling closed the door and turned back, only to see that the man who had just fallen drunk on the bed had sat up. He unbuttoned his coat, took it off, and casually tossed it to the side. At this moment, he was tugging at the collar of his black shirt impatiently. 3 or 4 buttons on the collar were forcibly pulled open, revealing the man's collarbone, revealing an indescribable wildness and sexiness. Seeing his movements, Fong Ling walked over to pick up the coat he had thrown on the ground, folded it, and placed it on the sofa by the side. She turned to ask him if he was awake, only to see that the man only tugged his clothes a little and lay back down. Listening to the man's breathing, she found that it was slightly heavier than usual. It was probably because he had drunk too much and felt hot. Fong Ling walked over and touched his forehead. It was indeed a little hot, but thankfully, it was not the kind of fever. She turned back into the bathroom, washed a towel, and wiped the man's head. As she wiped, she suddenly found that although she had known Li Nanheng for many years, she had never had such an opportunity to sit by the side and look at his face without any distractions. This man was indeed very good-looking. She had seen many good-looking men over the years. There were so many men in the base, and there were many good-looking and ugly ones, but there was no one as good-looking as Li Nanheng. Compared to Mo Jingshan's refined handsomeness and Dr. Qin's gentleness, Li Nanheng looked like the type of sunny and handsome little wolf dog when he was young, but now that he was 27 or 28 years old, he looked more robust than many good-looking men. The 3 men were all different, but compared to Mr. Mo and Dr. Qin, who looked gentle but were actually black-bellied, it was indeed more comfortable to get along with people like Li Nanheng. But she had also heard from others that Li Nanheng was also black-bellied. The only person he was honest with was her. His calmness was only directed at her. In the past, Fong Ling didn't think so. After coming to High City and meeting Mr. Mo, she finally understood what it meant to be able to manipulate clouds and rain with a flip of a hand without batting an eyelid, and what it meant to be truly two-faced. If it were Li Nanheng, he would have dragged her behind him and told her where there were clouds and where there were rain. When she was about to deal with it herself, he had already helped her settle everything. These 3 men had completely different personalities, but they miraculously became such close brothers, especially Li Nanheng's temper. When she was in the base and Los Angeles, she thought that everyone was afraid of him, but after coming here, she found that when these 3 ruthless characters sat together, there was no fear at all. They were completely stabbing each other with knives. But it seemed that only when he was with Dr. Qin and Mr. Mo, he was truly relaxed and defenseless. After wiping his face, Fong Ling sat on the bed and watched for a while. She recalled Li Nanheng's recent coldness and alienation toward her. Maintaining such a distance was indeed the way she had always wanted to interact with him. She was about to get up and send the towel back to the bathroom when her wrist suddenly tightened. Her body was suddenly pulled back and fell onto the bed. The man suddenly turned over and pressed her under his body. Fong Ling stared in astonishment at the man's deep eyes against the light on his back. She could not see if he was still drunk. Before she could speak, the man's drunken kiss abruptly landed. Fong Ling immediately turned her head to the side. Because she turned too much, the man's kiss fell on her ear, a particularly sensitive place. She immediately shivered and rushed to push him away as though she was stimulated. However, the man tied her hands behind her back, held her hands with one hand, and stroked the back of her head with the other. He turned her head around and pressed down again, forcing her to quickly shrink into the bed. Because the man was drunk, he didn't seem to have any self-control. When he pressed down, he didn't care about his own weight like before. Right now, he was pressing down on her so heavily and fiercely that she couldn't breathe. She wanted to struggle, but she was restrained by the man's hands and feet. Fong Ling cursed in her heart. When he bent down to kiss her again, she gritted her teeth and cursed, "Isn't it good to be cold and indifferent all the time? Why do you have to pretend to be drunk to do such beastly acts? Do you think you can deceive me or deceive yourself?" Li Nanheng's brows furrowed slightly, and his scorching breath brushed past her extremely sensitive ears. "Little wife, let me kiss you, en?" Fong Ling, little wife, he thought she was his wife? So he was drunk, so drunk that he didn't even know who the person he was pressing on the bed was? Fong Ling thought that she was calm enough, but in an instant, the feeling of collapse in her heart made her entire head boil. She abruptly began to struggle hard, let go of Li Nanheng. Although Li Nanheng could press her down, she was really angry right now. Her punches and kicks were not light at all. Li Nanheng was in pain from her kicks and directly pressed her hands on both sides of her body. He crossed his fingers and looked down at her angry face. "Good wife, don't mess around. Just a kiss. Li Nanheng, you bastard. I thought you at least had some humanity. I didn't expect you to be so shameless." Feng Ling was so angry that her face turned pale. It was one thing for this man to be married, but now he actually mistook her for his wife? Did he usually have such a good relationship with his wife at home? Then what did he mean when he vowed to her in the past? However, after struggling for a long time, she could not break free. She angrily turned her head away and was about to bite his shoulder. However, when she tilted her head and was about to bite him, the man suddenly turned his head to meet her, accurately blocked her angry lips, and directly kissed her deeply. Because of his sudden fierce kiss, Feng Ling almost couldn't breathe. She was so angry that her whole body was about to tremble, and she glared at the man on top of her. 4M. Chapter 1087. After being kissed by the man for a while, Feng Ling finally turned her head away and scolded, "You bastard." Before she could say the word bastard, the man kissed her again. When she was about to suffocate from his suppression and plunder, she heard the man's low and husky voice against her lips, "Don't swear." Feng Ling's face had turned pale from anger. "You're so drunk, and you still have the nerve to care whether I swear or not. Even if I swear, I'm scolding you, the king." The man kissed her again, as if he was punishing her. In the end, Feng Ling fell back onto the bed weakly. She took a deep breath and pushed his chest with some difficulty, but she still couldn't push him away. Li Nanheng always had a clean and pleasant smell, but tonight, because of his birthday, he sat together with Mr. Imo and chatted for a long time and drank a lot of wine. No matter how expensive the wine was, when all kinds of wine were mixed together, it wouldn't smell good. Especially Feng Ling, who drank red wine until she was drunk last time, was allergic to the smell of wine and wanted to avoid it. He didn't give her any chance to avoid it. She pushed his chest, "Sober up first. Get up." She felt uncomfortable being stared at by the man as if he was staring at a prey in his cage. She pushed him for a long time, but he still pressed her tightly and didn't move at all. "Li Nanheng, even if you're in heat, you have to look at the other party clearly. Get up first. I'm not your wife, you." Feng Ling's words were stopped by the man's unreasonable kiss again. Feng Ling looked at this shameless man in disbelief, but he didn't give her any chance to dodge. He sucked on her lips heavily. When she opened her mouth to bite him, he brushed his tongue between her tongue and sucked on it, causing her entire body to go numb. If she wasn't angry, if she had sensed it carefully, she might have been able to feel that the man's fierce and domineering kiss had a hint of accommodation for her. No matter how she wanted to bite him, he only kissed her patiently. Bit by bit, he went straight in, sucking her lips and tongue until they were burning hot and numb. Feng Ling forcefully pulled out a hand to hit his shoulder. The man once again raised his hand to pull her hand down, pressing it against her side. The man's unique scent and the strong smell of alcohol rushed into her nose and between her lips and teeth, causing her brain to swell and her heart to ache. She didn't know what kind of pain it was, but when she thought of how Li Nanheng treated her like his wife, and how this man behaved intimately in front of his wife, she felt as though she was about to explode. Is this the legendary jealousy? Feng Ling angrily tried to turn her face away. She almost arched her body on the bed, trying to avoid his lips. However, the man tightened his grip on her, not giving her the slightest chance to break free. It wasn't until he moved his lips to her ear that she got the chance to scold him. "Li Nanheng, if you dare to do that kind of thing to me again, I promise you won't see me again for the rest of your life." Li Nanheng didn't speak, but he suddenly quietened down. He leaned over her, pressed his lips against her ear, and didn't move again. "Do that kind of thing again?" Li Nanheng slowly shifted his gaze to the little woman under him. It was rare for him to not have a straight face but a face full of anger. What did he do to her? What kind? The night was dark. Fong Ling didn't look at the man's eyes. She didn't know if he was awakened by her roar or something. She pushed him hard, and this time, the man was finally pushed away by her. He lay down by the side. Fong Ling instantly sat up and was about to get off the bed when the man suddenly turned over and pulled her into his arms. He forced her onto the bed again. This time, he didn't press her down but lay by her side, holding her in his arms. "Are you drunk or not? Don't be so shameless. I'm not your wife." In her life, Fong Ling had never felt as though her heart had been fried. She had all kinds of feelings. Sour, painful, everything. She didn't expect that this man's strange call of wife would suddenly cause her to lose control of her heart to such an extent. Li Nanheng didn't answer but used his increasingly determined actions to tell her that she was his wife. He hugged her tighter and tighter, not giving her a chance to break free. Fong Ling's heart was still exploding. She closed her eyes. The light in the room was very bright, but when she closed her eyes, it still felt dazzling. She turned her head to avoid the light and the man's breath. Suddenly, she felt particularly powerless. She didn't return to 11 base not because of the dignity she lost back then, but because of him. She insisted on not returning, not because she didn't like it, but because she couldn't do it. But she was in High City, and he was also in High City. She avoided him, but he approached step by step. They had clearly already given each other the cold shoulder. Now that she was stimulated to the point where she could completely feel the depression in her heart, the resistance and jealousy in her heart, did he really feel a sense of accomplishment? Must he let a person like her completely fall in love and die for a love? Only then would he be satisfied? But today, she found out. It turned out that the reason she had been forcing herself to hold on. It turned out that she had been saying that she didn't care. But it couldn't compare to his affectionate words of wife. Fong Ling closed her eyes and didn't want to move anymore. Even if she moved, she couldn't break free. In the end, she simply didn't waste her strength and just lay there quietly, letting the man's arms hold her. She almost fell asleep in those inexplicable emotions. She seemed to feel that the man was watching her by the side, but she didn't want to open her eyes. Li Nanheng looked at the little woman beside him, who had finally learned to be jealous and angry, and fell into self-reproach because of her jealousy and anger. He firmly imprisoned her in his arms. No matter how dark the night was, it couldn't be darker than his eyes at this moment. He stared fixedly at the woman in his arms, who was finally beginning to be controlled by her emotions. Finally, she let herself fall asleep. The man raised his hand to touch her face. He felt the coldness of her cheeks and slowly sat up. Fong Ling must have really angered herself. When she fell asleep, her brows were still slightly furrowed. Li Nanheng picked her up and placed her back on the bed. He let her rest on the pillow and then covered her with the quilt. Looking at Fong Ling, who seemed to be in a bad dream, he gently stroked her soft hair. "Fool, you're jealous of yourself. Let's see how long you can stay calm." 4M. Chapter 1088. Qin sighting called. It was probably because he had seen the two women at Zijing Qing Clubhouse tonight that he, the usually calm Dr. Qin, had finally been triggered. It was rare for him to continue drinking. When Li Nanheng answered the phone, he glanced back at Fong Ling who was sleeping on the bed. After making sure she was sleeping soundly under the warm quilt, he adjusted the air conditioner to a comfortable temperature and went out. Before Mo Jingshan rushed to Qin Sighting's villa, he called Li Nanheng. "Didn't you just drink tonight? Why are you drinking at Qin Sighting's place again?" Li Nanheng had already arrived. He sat on the sofa, glanced at the bright lights in the villa area outside the window, and then glanced at Qin Sighting who was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows with a gloomy and cold expression. "I was afraid he would take things too hard, so I came to take a look. But he has been standing in front of the window like a block of wood for half an hour. I suspect he has already entered a meditative state and can't hear anything." Speaking up to this point, Li Nanheng raised his hand and rubbed between his brows. If it weren't for Qin's sighting, he wouldn't have left Feng Ling alone in the hotel. Li Nanheng had no intention of meddling in the matter of calling Shi Nianzhi to Zijingqing Club, but Shi Nianzhi happened to choose to send a cake on his birthday, and Li Nanheng happened to be staying in High City for a long time, so he didn't have the time to interfere. However, he still couldn't bear to see Qin's sightings lonely and indifferent appearance these past few years. When Mo Jingshan arrived, Qin's sighting was still standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. How long has he been standing there? Mo Jingshan walked in. Li Nanheng turned to watch the tall man walk in. He flicked the cigarette ash with his well-defined fingers and raised his brows. He has been standing there since he came back. He was like this when I came. Speaking of which. He glanced at Mo Jingshan. You can still come so late. Could it be that Jin Wan was so drunk that she couldn't recognize you and kicked you off the bed? Mo Jingshan glanced at him. You are very experienced. You often get kicked by women? Li Nanheng raised his brows and smiled as he held the cigarette in his mouth. Didn't he often get kicked? In this life, the only woman who had ever kicked him was Feng Ling. As early as an hour ago, in the hotel room, he had been kicked by her several times, and now his calf bone was still aching. The three men drank in the villa until dawn and ridiculed Qin's sighting. At the same time, Li Nanheng glanced at his cell phone. There was no call from Feng Ling. Even if she woke up, she wouldn't call him. Even if she woke up, she wouldn't call him. If he didn't really give her a hard time, he didn't know how long the little girl would be numb to it. It was rare for Qin's sighting to drink a lot tonight because Shi Nianzhi had left for so many years. However, she had recently returned to the country and appeared in front of him again. The lights in the villa opposite lit up again after a few years. Who would have thought that he had been defeated by love many years ago? He was a celebrity in the medical field who could control the life and death of people in front of the operating table. Mo Jingshan was not in a good mood tonight. It was said that Jin Wan said she was going to T City to study, and his warm and soft wife wanted to go to another city to further her studies. Mo Jingshan had no reason to refuse. He had nowhere to vent his anger. Mo Jingshan was in a bad mood tonight. It was said that Jin Wan said she was going to study in T City, and his wife wanted to go to another city to study. Mo Jingshan had no reason to refuse. But Li Nanheng was different. His little wife finally learned to be jealous. Boss Li was in a good mood. When Feng Ling woke up, it was already 6:00 in the morning. When she opened her eyes, she sat up abruptly. She didn't see Li Nanheng in the room, and the coat he had worn before was gone. He was gone. So last night, he hugged, nibbled, and kissed her. Sure enough, he regarded her as his wife. Whom did he regard as Feng Mingzhu? When he woke up, he found that the person in the room was her, so he didn't even say hello and left. Feng Ling got out of bed and walked around the room. There was no trace of Li Nanheng. She took a look at the sky outside the window. He must have been gone for a long time. So should she send him a text message now, wishing him and Feng Mingzhu a happy marriage and have a son soon? Maybe it was because she suddenly couldn't suppress her anger and this childish thought that she laughed. She stood in the room for a while and grinned inexplicably, but there was no warmth in her eyes. She gradually calmed down, went to the bathroom to wash up, and then left the room. Ignoring Li Nanheng's ID card, she took back her ID card and walked out without looking back. 2 hours later, Li Nanheng returned to the hotel. Seeing him come back, the staff at the front desk respectfully handed him his ID card, and at the same time said respectfully in a low voice, "Mr. Li, Miss Feng didn't say anything when she left, but she didn't look very good when she left." Li Nanheng responded lightly, glanced at his cell phone, and sent a text message to Feng Ling as he walked out. "I drank too much last night. Sorry." After sending the text message, Li Nanheng got into the car and sat in the car waiting slowly. 5 minutes later, Feng Ling, who rarely sent text messages and would never reply to his text message according to her usual temper, sent him a scram. Looking at the angry word and the exclamation mark, Fang Qiu felt a chill down his spine. Li Nanheng sat in the car and laughed. Little Feng Ling, who had always tried to be calm and cautious in everything. Today, she completely exploded. She was quite cute. Li Nanheng looked at the word with a smile and did not reply. He threw the cell phone on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove away from the hotel. After exploding, Feng Ling began to deliberately avoid any place where Li Nanheng was. Knowing that he was in High City recently, Feng Ling didn't even go to the MO Corporation. She just stayed by Jin Wan's side every day as a door god. Whether it was Jin Wan's studio, the conference room, or other occasions, or the Yu Garden, except for her current temporary residence, Feng Ling had almost become Jin Wan's pendant. If it weren't for Mr. Mo, Feng Ling would not leave for a moment. Jin Wan also clearly found that Feng Ling's recent state was not very good, and couldn't help asking her, "You don't even want a little personal rest recently? You've been guarding me every day. Is it because someone very dangerous is going to appear recently? You make me feel a little scared." Feng Ling, no, I just feel that since Mr. Mo asked me to guarantee your safety, I can't be too negligent. Jin Wan couldn't help laughing. You've been so protective of me. Why do I always feel that you seem to be hiding from someone recently? No, you're wrong. Jin Wan raised her eyebrows. Really? No. Chapter 1089. Mrs. Mo planned to go to a very famous university in T-City to further her studies. Mo Jingshan couldn't go to T-City to accompany her, so Feng Ling was naturally responsible for Mrs. Mo's safety throughout the journey. However, Mr. Mo arranged an apartment very close to T University for Jin Wan. He also arranged an apartment next to the apartment for Feng Ling, but Feng Ling didn't live there. The reason was that when Feng Ling arrived in T-City, she met Wen Liqing, who was in China. At first, Wen Liqing said that the medical school in the United States, where she had studied, sent her to China to be a guest professor at the famous medical school in T-City for 3 months. Her relative happened to have an empty house here, so she came to live there. The house was not small, and it was boring to live alone. Seeing Feng Ling came, she asked her to live with her. Anyway, there were several bedrooms in the house. Even if Feng Ling didn't like to be disturbed when she slept, there would be no problem. The place where Wen Liqing lived was not far from Jin Wan's residence. It took about 20 minutes to walk and a few minutes to drive. It happened that Jin Wan didn't plan to live in an apartment after arriving in T-City, but chose to live on campus. This place was closer to T University, and Feng Ling and Wen Liqing were good friends, so Feng Ling agreed to live there. In T-City, Jin Wan stayed at school all day during the day and didn't even come out at night. Nominally, Feng Ling came to protect her, but she couldn't enter T University at will, so she spent most of her time with Wen Liqing. There will be a fraternity party at the medical school in the evening. I don't think I can come back tonight. If you are hungry, you can eat by yourself. Don't wait for me. Wen Liqing filled the refrigerator with food before leaving. Feng Ling didn't need to do anything at all. When it was time, she opened the refrigerator and saw all kinds of cold, hot, or ready-to-eat food in it. She didn't feel hungry at all. Wen Liqing was the kind of woman who looked very gentle but was very careful and warm. Even if she left Feng Ling alone at home, she would arrange everything at home properly and wouldn't make Feng Ling feel uncomfortable at all. In the evening, someone knocked on the door. Feng Ling looked at the time and knew that it was definitely not Wen Liqing who knocked at the door at this time, so she ignored it. In the end, the person outside knocked on the door again after a while. However, the knocking sound seemed to be very patient. This floor wasn't high, and she had some self-defense items on her. Under the coffee table in the living room, there was a small electric baton that Wen Liqing had left for self-defense. After listening to the knocking for a while, Feng Ling picked up the electric baton under the coffee table and turned to open the door. The moment she opened the door, Feng Ling's gaze was cold and calm, but she suddenly saw a man standing outside the door. The coldness in her eyes froze. Dr. Wen was also surprised to see Feng Ling here. His cold eyes lingered on Feng Ling for 2 seconds and he said indifferently, Xiao Qing is not here? Miss Wen has a fraternity party at the medical school tonight. She went out with several seniors and won't come back until very late or tomorrow morning. Dr. Wen, what are you doing? Feng Ling looked at the man in front of her. It seemed that in her impression, the time she met Dr. Wen was in the infirmary of the base, or every time someone was injured, or in the hospital. Every time, he was in a white work uniform, which always looked elegant and cold. Now he was wearing a very casual light brown shirt, and his hair was clean and fluffy. Even if she didn't know he was a medical worker, she knew he was definitely an unapproachable flower. Dr. Wen was silent for a moment. Are you staying here with her? Yes, she asked me to stay here temporarily. Dr. Wen nodded. When she comes back, give me a call. If it's urgent, you can come in and wait. No, if Li Nanheng finds out that I am alone with you in a room, he will probably fly over and tear me apart. Dr. Wen's words sounded like a joke, but there was not much smile on his face. He just glanced at the living room behind her and turned to leave. Feng Ling looked at Dr. Wen's back and felt that he seemed to come in a hurry. It was said that Dr. Wen was very busy in several hospitals in the United States, and there were many medical symposiums in the United States on weekdays. Even Dr. Qin, who was too lazy to participate in anything on weekdays, was somewhat busy recently. Shouldn't Dr. Wen bear the brunt of it? Why was he here? Did he suddenly fly to China to see Miss Wen? Usually, Wen Liqing came back very early. She didn't know when she would come back for the so-called fraternity party. Feng Ling had never participated in a fraternity party, so she didn't know what kind of activity it was. At about 9:00 in the evening, Dr. Wen appeared again. Seeing that Wen Liqing hadn't come back yet, he asked Feng Ling where Wen Liqing was now. Feng Ling called Wen Liqing and asked her where the fraternity party was held. Wen Liqing seemed to have drunk some wine on the phone. There were many people around her, men and women, and the atmosphere was very lively. After telling Feng Ling the location, Dr. Wen asked her if she wanted to come over. Feng Ling looked at Dr. Wen's cold face and said that she would drive over to pick her up, and then hung up the phone. She is at the Lanting Guild Hall at number 19 Dongxiang Road. Shall I pick her up? Or Dr. Wen? When she said this, she saw his expression. Feng Ling knew that Dr. Wen had just flown over from the United States and probably didn't send a car here, so she handed her car key to him. Dr. Wen took the electronic car key from her and glanced at her again. What do you know? I don't know anything. I only know that Miss Wen is a very good woman. When I had an accident in 11 base a few years ago, Miss Wen helped me. Otherwise, I would have died on the side of the road. Dr. Wen took a deep look at her, said no more, and left. Lanting Guild Hall. In a large private room, several young professors of medical schools and scholars with some reputation in the domestic medical community were sitting together. Even though they were very drunk, they just drank and chatted all the time because of their different careers and personalities. They didn't sing karaoke or play cards. Only a few people went to the next room to play cards, and the private room here was filled with the smell of alcohol. Wen Liqing held a bottle of champagne in her hand and leaned her head on the shoulder of a young man next to her. Her cheeks were a little flushed, and she said with a pair of slightly drunk eyes, "Senior, you always said that I would give up sooner or later. I thought I could hold on for a long time since I was 16 years old, but this time it seems that I'm really going to give up." 4M. Chapter 1090. The young man on her shoulder sat on the sofa and didn't move. He just took away the bottle in her hand. Just give up. Don't drink. Wen Liqing closed her eyes and leaned on his shoulder. Yes, I haven't drunk for many years. After drinking this time, have a good sleep, and everything will be over. I'll send you back later. Let's talk about it after you wake up. Wen Liqing shook her head, turned her face, raised her hand to wipe her slightly wet eyes, and then leaned her head on his shoulder. I agreed to the arrangement of the medical school this time and will leave Los Angeles temporarily because I want to warn myself that I have to end things. It has been so many years, almost 10 years. I feel that I really can't stand it anymore. How can he be so ruthless? When I thought we were related by blood, he refused me, but later when I knew we were not related by blood, he still regarded me as his sister. Who wants to be his sister? With that, she saw that the bottle in her hand disappeared, reached out to pick up a glass of wine on the table, turned her head and leaned on the shoulder of a senior sister who was a few years older than her on the other side. Senior sister, I feel sad. Have a few drinks with me. The woman who was called senior sister raised her hand and patted her on the head comfortingly. It's okay, it's okay. You can't find a three-legged toad, but there are two-legged men all over the world. Wen Linhan is not the only man in the world. Look, your senior brother has been waiting for you for so many years, but you just treat him as your boyfriend. If you really want to get over it, you can just accept your senior brother. Wen Liqing chuckled, took a sip of wine, and then stood up with a bit hazy eyes. Seeing that no one was singing on the big screen, she staggered over, picked up the microphone, and said loudly as if announcing something, "Wen Linhan, I don't want you anymore." At this moment, the door of the private room was abruptly pushed open. A man walked in with a cold aura. His gaze unmistakably landed on the woman who usually wouldn't yell at anyone, but at this moment, she was holding a microphone and yelling. The originally noisy private room instantly fell into a strange silence because of the appearance of the man in front of the door. Wen Liqing didn't even look at the man who suddenly appeared in front of the door. She just took a deep breath. She finally decided to let go of the obsessions and things that she couldn't let go of since she was 16. Everyone in the private room looked at Wen Liqing, who was holding the microphone. Wen Liqing had always been the darling of their group. When she was in school, she had a good personality, studied well, treated others well, had a high EQ, and was very smart. She never had any resentment towards life, and almost everyone who came into contact with her liked her. She used to be a good girl, and there were many men who chased after her, but she always held back and refused to fall in love. A few years later, everyone knew that she had put her brother in her heart from the age of 16. The affairs of the Wen family were a bit complicated, but it was a blessing. Wen Liqing had never been able to break the taboo. In the end, because her brother did not have a real blood relationship with her, she finally broke the taboo, but Wen Linhan insisted that they only had a sibling relationship and never took a step forward. Wen Liqing's emotional struggle for nearly 10 years finally came to an end after Wen Linhan planned to be engaged to a woman arranged by the Wen family. In the past, everyone advised her not to take Wen Linhan too seriously, but probably her God gave her all the excellence, but he didn't give her an open-minded heart. In terms of love, she just stuck to Wen Linhan and stubbornly refused to turn back. It was the first time in so many years that they heard her say that she was going to give up Wen Linhan. However, Wen Linhan, who had always been hiding from her, suddenly appeared in T-City. What was going on? Wen Liqing didn't see him, so she held the microphone and shouted again, "I don't want you anymore. I don't want you anymore. Wen Linhan, even if you kneel down and beg me now, I don't want you anymore. Everyone. Little princess, Dr. Wen is here. You don't have to shout so loudly. He can hear you." Wen Linhan stood in front of the door, looking at the drunk woman who touched the microphone in her hand as if holding a treasure. His eyes were cold and he didn't speak. He just closed the door, stood there, looked at her, and didn't move. No one in the private room dared to speak. Everyone knew that Dr. Wen was cold and indifferent. This person seemed to be indifferent. There was nothing that he particularly cared about, and there was nothing that he could persist in, but in fact, he was not a person to be trifled with. At that time, many people in the medical community of various countries warmly invited him to work in various world-famous hospitals, but Dr. Wen didn't like them at all. In the end, he chose to be a carefree base doctor in the infirmary of 11 base. It could be seen that his temper was really not easy to control, and not everyone could shake the things he insisted on. So why did he suddenly appear in Tea City at this time? It was simply like the sun rose from the west, okay? Wen Linhan, let me tell you, it's not that no one wants me. I've kept myself chaste for you for so many years. I've been looking forward to it since I was a 16-year-old girl. I even kept my first kiss for you. Oh, no, I lost my first kiss long ago. But that was an accident. Every time I kissed you, it was an accident. You pushed me away every time. I didn't even give you a proper kiss. Are you worthy of my feelings for you for so many years? Everyone was wondering if it was appropriate for them to stay here any longer. If they allowed her to continue talking, who knew what other explosive things would be revealed? Especially now that Dr. Wen was standing here, watching Wen Liqing act like a drunkard with a straight face, they really didn't want to miss this big show at all. You can marry whoever you want. It has nothing to do with me. I will never think of you or miss you again. From tomorrow on, I, Wen Liqing, will avoid you whenever I see you. If I stick to you again, I will be hit by a car when I go out. I will choke to death when I drink water or eat. Why don't you drink yourself to death now? The man's voice suddenly sounded. No one in this private room dared to make a sound just now. Only the music on Wen Liqing's screen and her own roar could be heard. Suddenly, Wen Linhan's voice sounded, and everyone felt that their bones were about to be frozen. 4M. Chapter 1091. Wen Liqing's voice suddenly paused, and her hazy eyes suddenly turned to look at the person who couldn't possibly appear here. The moment their eyes met, her fingertips holding the microphone gradually became cold, and then she suddenly smiled. I really drank too much. I can even see illusions in people. Even though she said that, she was rooted to the spot and gripped the microphone tightly. All of a sudden, she couldn't say a word. Everyone looked at her who was shouting and swearing just now, but now even if she thought it was just a fake illusion, she still couldn't do anything. Wen Linhan walked over. The man was more than 1.8 meters tall. He looked down at the woman in front of him who was much shorter than him and said coldly, "Say what you just said again." Wen Liqing put the microphone to her mouth and stared at the man next to her. For some reason, she felt that this illusion seemed a little too real. Even Wen Linhan's smell was so similar to hers. She stood there for a long time, holding the thing in her hand tightly and looking at him. The blurred image in front of her became clearer and clearer. When she looked at the coldness in Wen Linhan's eyes, her eyes suddenly turned red. Brother, everyone, coward. You haven't made any progress after so many years. It's not an illusion. Wen Linhan's voice was indifferent. Wen Liqing suddenly smiled, but her eyes were red. It should be an illusion. Even if I take off my clothes and climb into his bed, Wen Linhan can still drive me out without any emotion. How could he come to Tea City? Today is the day he is supposed to get engaged. Wen Linhan is going to get engaged tomorrow. It's impossible for him to come here. As she spoke, she turned to look at the group of friends who were sitting on the sofa. All of them had a tacit understanding and were just looking in her direction. She felt her hands and feet turn cold. She suddenly threw down the microphone in her hand, and the sound of the microphone falling to the ground was heard in the private room. It was a little deafening. She suddenly turned around and was about to run out. But as soon as she took half a step, she was suddenly pulled back by the arm that suddenly stretched out from her waist. At the moment she crashed into the man's arms, she lowered her head to avoid the man's breath and pushed his chest hard with her hands. If you want to get engaged, just get engaged. I'm fine. You don't need to come to Tea City. Go away. Wen Linhan looked down at the woman struggling in his arms and didn't speak. He just turned to look at the senior student sitting on the sofa who had been with Wen Liqing for many years. At the moment when the two men's eyes met, the people around seemed to feel that there were silent cold arrows shooting at them. Dr. Wen, Shaoqing's personality has never been like this. Now that you've provoked her to this extent, isn't it too late to bring her back to the United States because of your conscience? The senior sat there with a slight smile on his face, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Take a person who is allergic to alcohol to such a place and let her drink like this. If I don't come now, do I have to wait for her to go into shock and stand in the emergency room and wait for her to be pushed in? Wen Linhan held the woman firmly in his arms and looked at him coldly. Haven't you seen her when she is allergic to alcohol? Or don't you know how many years she hasn't drunk alcohol? The man who was called the senior student frowned. When did Xiaoqing start to have this symptom? The senior sitting next to her suddenly patted her head with a look of realization on her face. Oh, I forgot. Xiaoqing didn't have any allergies when she was still in school. Later, when she was hospitalized with a fracture, the new nurse on duty used the wrong medicine and overdosed, leaving her with severe allergies to alcohol and several drugs. You guys weren't around at that time, so not many people knew about this. Xiaoqing didn't say anything about it, but she really hasn't had any alcohol in the past few years. The group of people fell silent again and only looked at Wen Linhan. Since Xiaoqing knew that she was allergic to alcohol, why did she drink so hard today? Was she trying to drink herself to death? Seeing Wen Liqing held in Dr. Wen's arms, they were suddenly not sure what she wanted to do tonight. If no one found her symptoms later, if she left alone now and something happened to her, no one would know. Most of the people here were medical workers. Alcohol allergy could be fatal if it was serious. Let go of me. Wen Linhan, let go of me. Wen Liqing was held in the man's arms and her breathing was a little irregular. She pushed him with red eyes. I don't want you anymore. Do you hear me? Even if I drink myself to death here, I won't want you anymore. Leave me alone. Don't mess around. Wait until you sober up. Wen Linhan looked at the woman in his arms whose cheeks were red because of breathing difficulties. Go to the hospital for desensitization injection and gastric lavage. You will have an accident. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I'm a doctor myself. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about me. Wen Liqing pushed him. Don't show up again. Don't show up again. I promise I won't pester you or beg you to look at me again. You can marry whoever you want. I'll pretend that I never had you as my brother. My life or death has nothing to do with you. Wen Linhan slowly frowned and warned in a low voice, don't make trouble again. Wen Liqing looked at him with red eyes but didn't speak. She just stared at him. If her eyes could kill, she would cut him into pieces. In fact, many people didn't understand. Wen Linhan had always been very good to Wen Liqing, his sister, but since the accident when she was 16 years old, since she began to put him in her heart, he began to keep a distance. For so many years, Wen Liqing had changed from a princess in a honeypot to a bitter little lotus for him. No matter what she did, she couldn't move him. Wen Linhan's heart was probably made of cold iron, just like his name, so he threw Wen Liqing's passionate heart to the ground again and again, trampled and crushed it mercilessly. I'm not making trouble. Wen Liqing seemed to see that he didn't believe her words at all, so she simply stopped struggling and calmed down in his arms. Looking into his cold eyes, she said, every word I said just now is true, Wen Linhan. There are so many warm people around me, but I nailed myself to you for so many years. When you chose to be engaged to another woman, should have pulled myself out. This scene, the people in the private room silently stood up and slipped out, leaving the large private room to the two of them. Seeing that some readers mentioned that they wanted to see the story of this couple, I can insert a small part in the existing part of the story. In this way, it won't affect the direction of Nanheng Feng Ling's story, and it will only be interspersed according to the timeline of the story, and there won't be any mention of it. After all, the plot of T-City has already come to an end. Before and after the release of the update, there will be a lot of things that people want to see in the main plot. 4M. Chapter 1092. Wen Linhan pressed her shoulder and said solemnly, Qing, you are in a bad mood, so you gave up a great opportunity in the United States and came to High City to be a guest professor. I don't blame you, but you are allergic to alcohol. Why did you come out to drink? Do you want to die or what? Wenlicheng didn't speak but struggled hard in his arms. In just a short while, her neck was already red and there were some dense red bumps. This was the early symptom of allergy. It was itchy and painful, and it was difficult for her to breathe. But no pain could compare to this man who threw her heart to the ground and chose to marry another woman. Wen Linhan didn't let go. The others in the room had already left, so he didn't need to care about her face anymore. He looked down at her and said, "If I didn't see the letter you wrote in my email before you left the United States, if I didn't notice your extreme mood, if I didn't come over and let you continue to drink, I'm afraid that you will go into shock later. If you continue to drink, it will be too late to send you to the hospital immediately. Do you want to threaten me with your life and prevent me from getting engaged?" "I didn't." Wenlicheng suddenly interrupted him and turned to look at him. "Even if I really die here, it has nothing to do with you. You said a few years ago that you have your own life and I have mine, and we shouldn't be so close to each other, right? Brother, isn't your purpose to make me leave you? You have no interest in that woman at all, but just because mom and dad like her, you, as a good son who has always respected them, even let them decide your marriage. You know that I will be angry when I see her, but you still agreed to the engagement. You forced me to give up. Okay, I give up now. Whether I am allergic or drunk to death, it won't bother you. I won't bother you anymore. My life has nothing to do with you. You have no responsibility. No one will blame it on you. You can continue to be a good son in the Wen family. Let me go." Wen Linhan's face instantly turned cold. "Qing, can you calm down?" Wenlicheng couldn't push him away at all. Probably because she had drunk too much, her skin was red and itchy all over, and her limbs were trembling faintly. She had no strength at all. Didn't he say that if she continued to pester him, he would cut off all ties with the Wen family and never appear in front of her again? Didn't he say that he had had enough of her misdeeds? No matter what she did, he wouldn't have any opinions and she could do whatever she wanted? Before she left the United States, she had only been depressed in the middle of the night, so she sat in front of the computer and wrote a long, long letter. She wrote all the feelings she had for him since she was 16, everything, and then sent it to the email he hadn't used for many, many years. She thought that he couldn't see it. He hadn't used that mailbox for a long time. But he actually saw it. So what if he saw it? Everything she had shown over the years, which one of them was not more direct than those stiff words? Now she was finally going to give up completely and withdraw from his life. Even if the blood in her heart was almost dripping dry, she would not disturb him anymore. Wouldn't this be what he wanted and finally give him some peace and quiet? He could finally get rid of her. He was going to get engaged the next day, just as he wanted. Everything was going according to plan, nothing was out of his control, everything was going according to the rules, nothing was out of his control, everything was peaceful. This was the life he wanted. Seeing the more and more red bumps on Wenlicheng's neck and face, Wen Linhan didn't speak anymore, but suddenly picked her up and walked out. Wenlicheng had no ability to resist now. She just closed her eyes, frowned, and said, "Since I was a child, everyone has praised me as the most obedient child. In everyone's eyes, I was the so-called child of other families, but all my rebelliousness and willfulness were only exposed in front of you. How hypocritical I was. On the surface, I pretended to be a cold and aloof girl who didn't want to fall in love and marry for the time being, but in fact, I was a fool who secretly loved my brother for nearly 10 years. Even when I thought the blood relationship was irreversible, I would rather confess my love to you and insist on loving you. Even if you spurned me, hated me, and pushed me away, I just wanted you. Oh, who would have thought? I, Wenlicheng, am not what I look like on the surface. The real me is like this, the one you hate. I'm so unreasonable. Why did you come to High City?" As she spoke, Wenlicheng had been resisting leaning against him, but her head finally tilted to one side weakly. Wen Linhan protected her head with one hand, and she lay in his arms powerlessly. At the same time, her head leaned on his shoulder. Because of severe alcohol allergy, she felt suffocated and gasped uncomfortably. Her whole face turned red and the red bumps on her neck became denser and denser. When Linhan walked out with her in his arms. Some of the people who had just slipped out of the private room went to the bathroom, some went to the card room next door, and some stood in the corridor chatting. When they saw Wen Linhan coming out with Wen Liqing in his arms, they all frowned worriedly. Is she really allergic? So serious? Without saying a word, Wen Linhan passed by them blankly and walked out with Wen Liqing in his arms. Seeing Dr. Wen's indifferent back, these friends who had been with Wen Liqing all the year round had long been familiar with him. Not to mention Dr. Wen now, even 10 years ago when they were still young, this man who looked as gentle as jade was indifferent and didn't like to talk to people, so they had long been used to it. Wen Liqing didn't faint, but she was tipsy and suffocated, so she had no strength. After being carried out and being blown by the cold wind, she suddenly shivered all over. Wen Linhan subconsciously hugged the woman in his arms tightly and watched her shrink her head in his arms. It was very similar to the time when she was kidnapped when she was a child and refused to leave his arms for 3 days and 3 nights. It was also at that time that she was kidnapped and almost killed. At that time, he was still young and rescued her before the police arrived. From then on, she completely clung to him. Whether he was her brother or not, family love was not important. She only wanted him. Chapter 1093. Put me down. Wen Liqing whispered weakly in his arms, I can walk by myself. Hearing her weak words, Wen Linhan stared at her face for a moment. His eyes were deep and emotionless, and he carried her into the car. When she was sent to the hospital, after a blood test and gastric lavage, she was finally given a desensitization injection. Wen Liqing was already in a semi-comatose state. When she was carried to the hospital bed for injection, she just frowned instinctively and couldn't even open her eyes. A doctor came over to check on her hand that was receiving the injection. He then adjusted the position of the infusion bottle on the bed and softly reminded, don't let this lady drink any more in the future. Her alcohol allergy is too dangerous. It's not a simple red and swollen allergy. If she's not sent to the hospital in time, even if she doesn't want to die, it may still have a big impact. If it's light, she may become paralyzed or disabled, I know. Wen Linhan said lightly, I'm a doctor. The doctor standing by the bed was stunned for a moment. Just now, when this man carried the lady into the hospital, what he said and the procedures for her treatment were all correct. No wonder he could calmly arrange the treatment process even though she was already like this. It turned out that he was also a doctor. Since he was in the same profession, there was no need to say anything more. The doctor smiled at the bedside and turned away. Seeing that Wen Liqing was still sleeping, Wen Linhan got up, walked out, and called Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't have to go to T University to accompany Jean Wan tonight, so she was bored at home. There was too much food in the kitchen refrigerator. She just took a blueberry-flavored pastry and sat on the sofa to eat it. While eating, she was waiting for news from Dr. Wen and Wen Liqing. Suddenly her cell phone rang and she quickly picked it up. Xiao Qing is in the hospital. She is allergic to alcohol. I'll take care of her here. I'll drive the car back tomorrow morning. Is it urgent? Wen Linhan's voice rang on the phone. No hurry. The car is arranged by Mr. Mo for me and Mrs. Mo. It's just a means of transportation. This place is very close to T University, and it won't take too long to walk. I'm not in a hurry. Is Miss Wen's condition serious? I haven't heard that she is allergic to alcohol. Otherwise, I would remind her not to go out to drink. Don't worry. With me here, it won't be a problem. Wen Linhan said lightly, Xiao Qing may not go back to live these days. Please help her take care of the house. What are you talking about, Dr. Wen? It's Miss Wen who invited me to live here and left me so much food. I'm so happy to have food and a place to live. When will she come back? Tell me in advance and I can pick her up. Okay, let's talk about it later. When Linhan didn't say much and hung up the phone after a few words. Seeing that the phone screen had turned black, Feng Ling placed the phone back on the sofa, raised her eyes to look at a certain military channel on the TV, and then changed the channel. However, it was difficult to accept some American TV stations in China, so she could only connect to online TV. Feng Ling looked at it for a while and then glanced at the time. With Dr. Wen by her side, Miss Wen would be fine no matter what happened, but she was a little worried about Jean Wan. 2 days ago, Jean Wan asked her out to eat and asked her about Swan Group and the Su family in Los Angeles. Although Feng Ling didn't know much about Mr. Mo, she had heard some related people and things. After all, there were many people in 11 base. She could hear a lot of things just by listening to the brothers in the base. A while ago, when she was waiting for Li Nanheng to sign the contract, she often went to the base canteen every day and heard a lot of topics. She felt that something was wrong with Jean Wan in T University, but Jean Wan insisted that she didn't need a bodyguard to follow her in case she attracted too much attention. But Feng Ling always felt that something was going to happen, and her eyelids twitched abnormally. Feng Ling's hunch was very accurate. 2 days later, at a bonfire party in T University, Jean Wan had an accident. It was a kidnapping. For Jean Wan's safety, Feng Ling accompanied her all the way that night, but Jean Wan's cell phone was running out of power, so she asked Feng Ling to help her go back to the apartment Mr. Mo arranged for her to get a mobile power supply. Seeing that Jean Wan left by T University, Feng Ling had to go back to get the power supply for her. However, as soon as she walked into Jean Wan's apartment, she ran into Mr. Mo, who flew from High City. Su Shui was Su Zhilan's cousin, and Feng Ling didn't know much about her. However, when Mo Jingshan saw the message Jean Wan sent to her before the accident, his face changed. The man who was usually calm and indifferent was still indifferent. His sharp eyes seemed to be filled with killing intent, and he rushed out of the door to save Su Shui. Feng Ling also saw the group photo found by Jean Wan on her cell phone and frowned when she saw Su Shui's photo. Sure enough, something happened. Although Mr. Mo was a low-key businessman, he was obviously very good at martial arts and very sensitive, so he arrived at the underground bar where Jean Wan was kidnapped in time. When Feng Ling and Mr. Mo went to save Jean Wan together, she saw Jean Wan in the underground bar and felt a chill in her heart. She didn't expect these people to be so crazy. She kicked the crotch of the middle-aged bespectacled man who fell on the ground and disabled him on the spot. In the next few days, Jean Wan was taken care of by Mr. Mo himself. There was no news from Miss Wen, and Mrs. Mo and Mr. Mo kept showing off their affection to each other all day, so Feng Ling had time to stare blankly in Wen Liqing's apartment. When she was in a daze, she felt the time ticking by and remembered that she had been in China for a while. Not to mention in High City, she had been in T City for a month. She didn't know whether Li Nanheng was really drunk or pretending to be drunk last time, but because she had nothing to do and it was too quiet around her, the words he said finally came to her mind again. It seemed that she hadn't seen Li Nanheng since that time. Some time ago, Mr. Mo occasionally mentioned that Li Nanheng was in the United States and hadn't come to China recently. Just when Feng Ling thought that her work in T City might be idle for a few more days, Mr. Mo suddenly asked her to accompany Jean Wan to T University. In order to let her stay by Jean Wan's side all the time, he specially arranged a place for her to transfer to T University. Mrs. Mo hadn't fully recovered from her injuries after being kidnapped. Feng Ling didn't expect that she would suddenly go back to T University. When she rushed to the apartment the next day, she felt a certain coldness and tension in the air as soon as she entered the door. Then she looked at Jean Wan, who seemed to be in a panic and refused to give in. It was obvious that they had quarreled. Chapter 1094. Mrs. Mo majored in business management at T University, and those who could study here were all from unusual families. As a temporary transfer student, many people would talk about Feng Ling's background behind her back, but obviously no one could find out or get a result. At 8:00 in the evening, Jean Wan's dormitory in T University was already very lively. Feng Ling walked in with her luggage. Ling Feifei, who was standing in the dormitory, glanced at the door disapprovingly. Seeing Feng Ling wearing a black plain women's t-shirt, black pants, black short leather boots, and carrying only a black travel bag, she didn't look like a daughter with a prominent family background and proper upbringing. She didn't even intend to take away the suitcase on her bed but just occupied it there and didn't take Feng Ling seriously at all. Hearing the conversation of these women in the dormitory, Feng Ling walked over expressionlessly and put the travel bag in her hand on the bed. When Ling Feifei stood up and was about to show off, Feng Ling directly kicked the pink suitcase occupying her bed down. "What are you doing?" Ling Feifei was startled, looked incredulously at the various clothes scattered from the suitcase, and scolded in a shrill voice, "How dare you kick my things? My suitcase and clothes are dirty. Can you afford to pay for it? You occupied my bed and wasted my time. Can you afford to pay for it?" Feng Ling asked with a frosty face. Then, under Ling Feifei's furious gaze, she sat down on the bed, didn't even look at her, and said coldly, "Feng Ling, short-range shooting coach of US 11 base, black belt in Taekwondo, and champion of the national women's boxing team. Please advise me." As soon as she finished speaking, the dormitory fell into a strange silence. A group of women who would only haggle over trifles were all suppressed by Feng Ling's aura in an instant and couldn't make a sound. Jean Wan usually didn't care about these people. Seeing Feng Ling came, she was very happy and secretly exchanged a glance with Feng Ling. The two of them had a tacit understanding. America. The Li residence. Recently, Li Nanheng learned that a group of mafia members that 11 Base's sniper team had personally gone to New York to kill had returned to China, and those people had recently moved to T-City. It was likely that Feng Ling, who had participated in that mission, had been targeted by them. Grandfather Li's health had improved recently. After visiting the Li family for a day, he was about to rush back to 11 Base. As soon as he walked out of the Li's mansion, he suddenly saw a red sports car parked there. The car door opened, and Feng Mingzhu got out of the car. She turned to look at him, smiled, and walked up to him. "My parents asked me to study in the UK for half a year some time ago. I just came back yesterday. I heard that Grandpa Li is not in good health recently, so I came to see him." "I didn't expect you to return to the Li family." Li Nanheng's expression did not change at all. "The person is inside. If you want to see him, just go in. I have something to do. I'm leaving." Seeing that the man did not intend to stay for even a second, Feng Mingzhu looked at his back and suddenly said, "The strange marriage between you and my sister, who died early, is almost 3 years old, right? After 3 years, you will regain your freedom. Do you have anyone in your heart? Are you going to marry someone else once the time is up?" Hearing this, Li Nanheng looked back at her indifferently, and his cold and low voice suddenly rang. "Hasn't the person in my heart been driven out of 11 Base by you?" Feng Mingzhu's smiling expression instantly stiffened, and her eyes flickered. Fortunately, she did not take off her sunglasses when she got out of the car. She only paused for a moment and then said with a smile, "What person in your heart? What driven out of 11 Base? Nanheng, who are you talking about?" The woman was very good at playing dumb. Li Nanheng's bottomless eyes were cold. He did not have any intention of being entangled with her and turned to leave coldly. "Because the 3-year agreement is coming, the Feng family plans to invite you over to have a chat. Because the 3-year agreement is coming, the Feng family intends to invite you over to have a chat. You know, my sister, who died early, only built a cenotaph. I heard that the Li family also buried her old clothes. My grandparents were very touched by the fact that the Li family was so responsible and didn't treat my sister as an outsider, so they didn't want to break the relationship with the Li family after the 3-year agreement ends. They know that I have always been fond of you, so. Nanheng, I don't mind the cenotaph between you and my sister. After all, she is just a person who died many years ago, so I won't take it to heart. Nanheng, between us, can we? Li Nanheng seemed not to hear her words. His eyes were cold, and he got into the car outside the Li family's house without looking back. Feng Mingzhu could see that he should have something to do and had to rush back to 11 base. Although she wanted to follow him, after all, she said that she was here to visit Grandpa Li, so it was not appropriate for her to follow him now. She could only watch him from a distance, only to see that after the man got into the car, he closed the window and drove away, not looking at her from beginning to end. She squeezed the bag in her hand and turned to walk into the Li family's house. Thinking of what Li Nanheng said just now, although she looked calm, she felt a little guilty. She had investigated some suspicious traces and behaviors of Feng Ling and suspected that she was a woman. She had told this idea to the elders of the Li family. Later, in order to avoid implicating herself, she had avoided those things and never mentioned it. She only heard that Feng Ling was driven out and was very embarrassed when she was driven out, which made her feel particularly happy. She had always thought that no one would know about this and that the elders would not mention these trivial things to Li Nanheng. But just now, Nanheng's words and his cold eyes. She couldn't believe it. It was as if he had already known everything. Feng Mingzhu pursed her lips. She had always been confident that she had never done anything evil in front of Li Nanheng. Except for feeling that she was a little too arrogant in his eyes, there was nothing that he hated about her. As long as he didn't have anyone in his heart, the Feng family and the Li family could make a good match. In addition, Li Nanheng had married a cenotaph. No matter how powerful the Li family was, many people might not dare to marry into the Li family for the time being. In this way, she could also take this opportunity to get closer to him. If the opportunity came, perhaps the identity of Mrs. Li would eventually fall into her hands. But just now, Li Nanheng's attitude was completely disrespectful. Did he really know something? She must not let him have any evidence against her. Otherwise, all her hopes would be in vain. Feng Mingzhu's heart was uneasy. At the same time that the main plot is beginning to connect, it means that now it is beginning to gradually cut into the various exciting plots that the relatives most want to see. Today is the first, the monthly votes have been updated again. Babies, take a look at your accounts. If there are monthly votes, vote for Qingqing. The release time is the 4th, which is around midnight on the 3rd. Chapter 1095. The Li family. Grandpa Li, Miss Feng is here. She said that she just came back from the UK and came to see you. Old Master Li leaned back on the recliner, raised his eyebrows, and grunted. He turned to see the figure walking in from outside the door and immediately smiled politely. It's really worth it for Mingzhu to call me Grandpa Li. If Grandpa is in trouble, you will definitely not ignore it. Unlike those in my family, who are usually busy in the Li Corporation or simply on business trips around the world. They never said they would come back to visit me. Feng Mingzhu said with a smile, they're really busy. I couldn't come back in the first half of the year. I heard that you've been in the hospital for a long time, Grandpa Li. I heard that at your age, stroke is a hurdle. Once you pass this hurdle, you'll definitely live a long life. Grandpa Li, you can at least live with us for another 20 or 30 years. Grandfather Li immediately smiled. What a sweet talker. 20 or 30 years? I'm in my 80s now. It's enough that I can leave without any disease or pain. I don't want to lie in bed all day and can't go anywhere. It's really unnecessary to live like this. Feng Mingzhu sat by the bed and chatted with him for a while with a smile. It didn't take long for her to deliberately bring the topic to Nanheng and her little sister's cenotaph. When the old man heard her mention this, the smile in his eyes did not change. Don't worry. Your sister's cenotaph has entered our Li family's door. No matter who Nanheng marries in the future, she is already a member of our Li family. No matter in name or in any other aspect, she will no longer be a wandering soul wandering around alone. Grandpa Li, the 3-year period is almost up. Does Nanheng have any other plans for the next step? Feng Mingzhu directly brought up the topic. Grandfather Li leaned against the recliner with a smile and looked at her. Why? Haven't you let it go? Feng Mingzhu smiled lightly. Everyone has an obsession. Nanheng is my obsession. No matter how long it has been and how far I have gone, I can't let it go. Grandfather Li smiled again. So this time you came here, hoping that I can help you arrange it. After the 3 years, do you still want to have something with Nanheng? If there is a chance between Nanheng and me, I can really do anything for him. Grandpa Li, I really want to call you Grandpa like him in the future. Nanheng and the cousins of the Li family are usually busy. You need to have a younger generation to accompany you. As long as I marry into the Li family will be my home. I can always accompany you, make you happy, and talk to you. Feng Mingzhu said sincerely. Besides, everyone thought that Nanheng was going to marry me. It's not good for me to marry someone else now. Grandpa, the relationship between the Feng family and the Li family has always been so close. Please help me think of a way to create more opportunities for me and Nanheng. Huh, you sound so pitiful. All right, I also like you, and I don't want to cut off contact with the Feng family in the future. If you really want to, Grandpa Li will take this matter to heart and talk to Nanheng later. Grandpa Li, you know how Nanheng feels about me. I'm afraid it's useless to talk to him. I still have to make arrangements for this matter. Grandfather Li raised his eyebrows. What do you want to do? Can you give me a chance to appear by his side? Grandfather Li paused, thought for a moment, and said, Oh, by the way, let's not talk about this. Old Master Li paused, thought for a moment, and then said, Oh, by the way, let's not talk about this first. Nanheng didn't mention that the 3-year promise was coming to an end the last 2 times he came back. In the past 3 years, he didn't mention your sister either. But this time, when he came back, he said that when the 3 years are up, he won't consider getting married for the time being. After all, it's equivalent to a ghost marriage. In the short term, there shouldn't be any girls willing to marry into the Li family. He said that he's happy to live in peace and just guard that child's cenotaph. These are Nanheng's original words. I don't think he has much interest in girls. If I arrange for you to be by his side at this time, I'm afraid you won't get any good treatment. Nanheng. Did he say that? Didn't he also force himself to marry the cenotaph before? Has he been waiting for the 3-year agreement to end? He used to be reluctant, but recently I see that he doesn't force himself at all. He even goes to the ancestral hall to burn incense for his little wife as if it's the new year. New year? He seems to be in a good mood. I don't understand why he is so happy about burning incense for his little wife in the cenotaph, Grandfather Li said with a sigh and a smile. Grandfather Li sighed and smiled. But this is also good. At least it shows that Nanheng doesn't feel that your sister is a burden. Your Feng family can feel more comfortable. Feng Ling smiled. Feng Mingzhu was stunned. Why wasn't she a burden? How much happiness had her younger sister, who died early, obstructed her from growing up? Now she obstructed her marriage. Finally, after 3 years, she could completely get rid of her shadow. But the Li family obviously didn't think that her sister's cenotaph was a taboo at all, nor did they intend to get rid of this burden. Even Nanheng seemed to plan to marry only one wife in this life. Then what about her? Just now, Grandpa Li promised her that he would help her arrange it, but now, just because of Nanheng's attitude recently, he didn't intend to help her for the time being? Feng Mingzhu wanted to say something, but at this time, Grandfather Li's cell phone rang. He took a look, raised his eyebrows, and said with a smile, Oh, this brat, he didn't even think of calling me in 800 years. He just left for a while, and now he called me. Hearing this call should be from Nanheng, Feng Mingzhu didn't speak anymore but sat quietly to listen. After taking the phone, Grandfather Li raised his eyebrows. After hanging up the phone, he took a thoughtful look at Feng Mingzhu. Grandpa Li, what did Nanheng say on the phone? Is he in the United States recently? Or, has he been in 11 base recently? Feng Mingzhu asked with a gentle smile. Grandfather Li didn't speak immediately but put the phone aside, then pulled up the thin blanket covering his legs, and suddenly said, Mingzhu, did you tell anyone other than our Li family about what happened to that girl named Feng Ling in 11 base? The smile in Feng Mingzhu's eyes suddenly faded a little, and she asked with a stiff expression, what people other than the Li family? Chapter 1096. Seeing Feng Mingzhu's slightly guilty expression, Grandfather Li looked at her for a while without batting an eyelid. He closed his eyes and leaned against the recliner. All right, it's rare for you to come back from England. Go back to the Feng family to accompany your family. I'm tired. I want to be alone for a while. Feng Mingzhu clenched her bag. Grandpa Li, go back. Grandfather Li didn't open his eyes to look at her. Seeing this, Feng Mingzhu didn't want to say anything more. She sat by the side for a while, trying to find an opportunity to talk, but seeing that Grandfather Li was really going to sleep, she had to get up and leave. When leaving the Li family's house, Feng Mingzhu hesitantly looked back at the large villa behind her and suddenly felt a little uneasy. In the matter of marrying into the Li family, the biggest trump card in her hand had always been because the elders liked her. She had grown up in front of them, so they trusted and liked her very much. When she told on Feng Ling, they didn't ask her why she cared about 11 base, nor did they ask her why she targeted Feng Ling. But everyone knew that the elders of the Li family were very principled, especially when it came to the reputation of the family and the reputation of 11 base. No one could sway them. That thing, she didn't only tell them secretly at that time, but at the same time, in order to prevent Feng Ling from staying in 11 base as a woman, she also spread the news. At that time, some bold overseas media reported this matter, but at that time, the Feng family and the Li family had just united, so no one paid much attention to those reports. Who would have thought that today, that matter would become her shackles? If Grandfather Li knew that she spread this kind of thing, he would definitely not be happy. His attitude just now was very obvious. Feng Mingzhu walked out in annoyance, got into the car, and slammed the door. Now Li Nanheng was so concerned about her sister's cenotaph, and he seemed to have deliberately called her when she was by Grandpa Li's side. She didn't know what he mentioned to Grandpa Li, but suddenly, the situation changed. What on earth was Li Nanheng planning? It was probably because Feng Ling had been in 11 base for so many years that she had never been exposed to the outside world. Mr. Mo arranged for her to be a transfer student. Although she didn't need to take an exam, she still had to attend classes every day. Although she didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that she had a very significant hypnotic effect on business management and the various forms and data displayed on the big screen every day. After a period of time, Feng Ling, who had only mastered the basic knowledge, seemed to have mastered some other skills, but she really couldn't master them. Even if she tried hard to listen carefully, she could only absorb half of the knowledge about numbers at most. Not only would Feng Ling be sleepy, but Jean Wan was also sleepy. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to stay awake every afternoon when she was too sleepy to open her eyes. Occasionally, when she looked back, she would see that Feng Ling, who was usually energetic, could barely keep her eyes open. She couldn't help but snicker. The class finally ended. Jean Wan went to the professor's side to discuss some matters while Feng Ling waited outside the school. She had to go out with Jean Wan at night to accompany her to buy some things. Feng Ling sat in the car, closed her eyes, and pretended to sleep. Ling Feifei and her friends passed by the car and recognized it as Jean Wan's car. However, they didn't see Feng Ling inside. When they passed by, Ling Feifei glanced over. She didn't know what Ling Feifei said to her friends, but the women suddenly walked toward the car. They stared at the car's tires as though they wanted to do something. Even though Feng Ling had her eyes closed, she could feel a strange pressure. She abruptly opened her eyes and saw the women sneakily approaching. They did not roll down the car windows and expressionlessly pressed on the car's horn as they approached. In an instant, the sound of the car's horn frightened the women who approached with guilt. They hurriedly stumbled back several steps and ran back to Ling Feifei's side in a fluster. They didn't expect there to be someone else in the car. Wasn't Jean Wan with the professor right now? Who was the person in the car? She was so arrogant and didn't even show her face. Although they were unhappy, they inexplicably felt that the person in the car was not someone to be trifled with, so they simply walked away quickly. Feng Ling sat in the driver's seat and didn't even move her eyes. She just felt that this kind of woman's despicable mentality was really disgusting. It was a waste of time to talk to them. Fortunately, Mrs. Imo didn't have the time to talk to them. A group of clowns. It was getting dark, and it was already past 6 o'clock. Jean Wan suddenly called and said that she was going to read more financial materials in the professor's office tonight. There were several other famous teachers and professors in the office. It was a good opportunity to learn and communicate with them. She asked Feng Ling to go shopping alone. After hanging up the phone, Feng Ling drove the car away and went to a large supermarket near T University. She bought a lot of things according to the list Jean Wan needed. Feng Ling walked out with 2 shopping bags in her hand, put them in the trunk, and opened the door to get in the car. When she drove back in the direction of T University, Feng Ling suddenly keenly noticed something wrong. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look at the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of a black Mercedes-Benz following behind. She paused and suddenly changed the direction, drove into an alley at a fork in the road, got out of the alley, and changed to another route to go back. It was only a 10-minute journey, but she deliberately took a detour. After walking for nearly 20 minutes, she saw that the black Mercedes-Benz was still following her. If these people came to T City for Jean Wan, they should have gone directly to the vicinity of T University instead of deliberately following her car. Since they followed her like this, it was obvious that these people were coming for her. Every member of 11 Base would have a habitual psychological preparation, that is, because they had faced too many terrorists in dangerous situations. One day in the future, they might meet someone seeking revenge on them on the street. Even though she had left 11 Base for so long, Feng Ling was not surprised by the sudden appearance of people following her. But now if these people were really coming for her, she had to stay away from Jean Wan in the next few days, or if Jean Wan was implicated, Mr. Imo wouldn't be able to explain it. Chapter 1097. Sensing that Feng Ling was taking a detour, the Mercedes-Benz behind her stopped following her and chose to turn to another route to avoid her counterattack. Feng Ling drove the car back to T University. After circling the neighborhood, she decided that she couldn't go back to Jean Wan's apartment or Miss Wen's residence for the time being. Otherwise, she would only cause trouble for them, so she just put the things she bought in the security room in front of the gate of T University and sent a message to Jean Wan, asking her to pick them up after she finished her work and to take them back to her dormitory. After giving these instructions, he drove away. Jean Wan hadn't seen Feng Ling in T University for about 2 days, nor did she receive a call from Feng Ling. Feng Ling was very cautious and would never be more than 5 meters away from her. But these 2 days, Feng Ling suddenly disappeared. Strange. When Mo Jingshan went to T City again, he received a message from Li Nanheng and glanced at it. Nanheng, in T City? Mo Jingshan replied with one word, yes. Nanheng, in that apartment or somewhere else? Mo Jingshan replied, apartment. Within half an hour, Nanheng drove over, knocked on the door, and came in. Mo Jingshan saw that he was travel-worn. Obviously, he had driven across the province overnight. He looked cold and decadent. As soon as he entered the door, he went inside to find water to drink. Why are you in such a hurry? What's the matter? Li Nanheng put down the glass in his hand. Back then, when Feng Ling completed a mission at 11 Base in the United States, she intercepted several smuggled military vehicles belonging to the New York Mafia. Those people have been tracking her whereabouts for the past 2 years, and in the past 2 days, they have moved to T City. Her whereabouts are currently being monitored. Mo Jingshan looked back. There are not many people in T City. Have you transferred other people here? Yes. Feng Ling is good at martial arts. If she notices anything unusual, she should be prepared for it. Doesn't she know that you are here this time? I flew to High City overnight to transfer people and drove here from High City, but I haven't seen her yet. Li Nanheng took a look at the time when he sat down. Deal with Jin Wan's affairs by yourself. Feng Ling can't take care of herself. Take care of your wife. Don't let anything happen to her. No, it's fine as long as you're safe. They're all old grudges with 11 base. It's related to the arms deals in New York and Los Angeles. Their target is Feng Ling. It won't affect Jin Wan. Nanheng drove here overnight and did not sleep. He coughed with a cold expression and said, but for the next few days, you'd better not let Feng Ling follow Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before saying, the New York Mafia's vengeance has always targeted a specific person. With their abilities, they won't be able to cause trouble in the country. They won't dare to implicate more people in the country. As long as Feng Ling takes precautions in time, there won't be much of a problem. Li Nanheng knew that it was not a big problem, but after leaving her in China for so long, it was time to close the net. Be careful, Mo Jingshan said. Li Nanheng didn't say more. Now was the right time to send the group of people who had frequently set up obstacles in the United States to the next world. The shady business they had done over the years was enough for them to take revenge. When the time came, they should personally send them on their way. Feng Ling didn't go back for 2 days. After 2 days of chasing and secretly observing, she was completely sure of the background of the group of people who were following her. They were all the group of people who had been left behind. Here in China, the security was much stricter than in the United States, so it was not convenient to chase her on the road. Besides, T City was not their territory, so they could only follow her for the time being and wait for an opportunity. After temporarily shaking off the group of people, Feng Ling, who had been outside for 2 days, had to go back to the place where she lived to take away some of her things, and she should move away from Miss Wen's place for the time being. She couldn't leave any of her things for these people to investigate. While the group of people was temporarily shaken off, Feng Ling drove to the community where Miss Wen and her lived some time ago, but she still carefully parked the car outside the community and then walked in through the side door alone. However, what Feng Ling didn't expect was that the group of people had already found her residence in T City, and there were already 2 strong men waiting at the intersection she had to pass. As soon as she walked in, she suddenly saw the 2 men. Feng Ling stopped and took a step back calmly. Then she felt a chill on her back and looked back, only to see another strong man behind her, who seemed to have gotten out of the car parked not far away. Feng Ling glanced at the tall and strong men and the weapons in their hands. These people completely surrounded her in this alley. One of them was holding a long knife similar to the one used to cut watermelons in fruit stalls, and the other 2 were holding long black electric batons, approaching her step by step. In this kind of place, they absolutely didn't dare to use guns. If the sound of gunshots caused the people nearby to become restless and really alarmed the domestic police, this group of people would not be able to continue to track her smoothly. Looking at the things in their hands, Feng Ling silently took a step back to the side of the gun, and at the moment the man behind her rushed over with the electric baton, she decisively and quickly raised her hand to hit the man's wrist. At the same time, with a quick and agile turn, she caught the man and pressed him to the ground. The man didn't expect that she was so powerful without a weapon in her hand. Wasn't it as rumored that this Feng Ling was only good at shooting? Her skills in close combat were so fast that the man couldn't guard against her, and the electric baton in his hand was instantly snatched away. Although Feng Ling's skills were good, the opponent was, after all, 3 strong men. The man who had just fallen to the ground took the opportunity to climb up. Just by waving his fist at her, it was enough to make her unable to deal with him. Furthermore, the other 2 had an electric baton and a knife. After several rounds of fighting, her arm was struck by the electric baton, and at the same time, her shoulder was cut by the blade. Just as she was forced to lean against the wall, looking coldly for an opportunity to escape, one of the strong men she had just defeated rushed forward and grabbed her neck. He ruthlessly pushed her against the wall, his grip almost instantly breaking her neck. He cursed in American English, causing Feng Ling to furrow her brows. These people, as expected, were indeed the group from the mission in New York. At that time, their accent was also like this. Outside the alley, the black jeep sped over. It abruptly saw Feng Ling's car parked outside. At the same time, it saw several cars parked near her car. There was another car parked near the alley. It seemed like the people inside had been blocked. Li Nanheng glanced at the direction of the alley and drove around it. Old rules. Due to the large number of updates, it will take a day to correct the mistakes in the saved manuscripts and the saved chapters. Tomorrow, I will stop updating for a day. See you the day after tomorrow. 2 consecutive days of updates should not be less than 80,000 words, starting to activate the warning of more sweet content. I love you guys. Seeking monthly votes. Chapter 1098. Feng Ling kicked the brawny man in front of her away, freeing her neck that was almost about to be broken from the other party's grip. She turned to avoid the other party's hand that was about to grab her again. However, 3 people still came to attack her. In the narrow space of this alley, there was no place for her to hide. Both the electric baton and the long knife were too threatening. The fight did not stop. Both of her arms had been injured. Although it was not serious, there was blood dripping down her arms. When one of the men cursed because she had kicked his manhood, Gu Shizhou's eyes sharpened and she kicked him to the ground with a roundhouse kick. As he cursed and stood up, she was about to fight the other man with the stun baton, but the stun baton in his hand had already been switched on, and the sound of electric current could be heard in the air. With the intensity of the electric shock, if she was really electrocuted, half of her body would probably be numb for 2 days. In the confrontation, the man who had just been kicked down raised a knife and slashed down at her head. Feng Ling nimbly raised her head and grabbed his wrist. With a sharp twist, she heard the sound of his wrist dislocating. The foreign man, who was much taller than her, immediately screamed in pain. Feng Ling expressionlessly raised her foot and kicked him. "What are you doing?" Feng Ling asked. However, at this moment, another person got up, raised the electric baton, and stabbed it hard into her waist. Feng Ling immediately felt pain in half of her body. Even though she suddenly turned around to dodge and was about to fight back, her movements were still a little slow because of the electric shock. The man took the opportunity to kick her in the stomach. She bent down to avoid it, but the man suddenly grabbed her hair. All kinds of curses rang in her ears, and Feng Ling's scalp ached from being pulled. No matter how much strength she had used up a lot of her strength. She was trying to think of a way to retreat from this man's hand when she suddenly noticed a figure appearing at the entrance of the alley from the corner of her eye. Jin Wan? Why did she come here alone instead of staying in T University? However, when she saw Jin Wan clearly, she saw that Jin Wan was holding a baseball bat that she didn't know where she got it from. She had long known that Mrs. Mo, who was weak, had a courage that even Feng Ling couldn't understand. Feng Ling didn't think about it anymore. She had to end it now. Feng Ling suddenly smiled at the 3 strong men in front of her. The corners of her mouth were stained with blood. In the dim alley, her smile was a little cold and cruel. When Feng Ling successfully attracted all the attention of the 2 men, suddenly, there were 3 bangs in the air. The 3 men were hit by a baseball bat on the back of their heads. Before they had time to turn their heads, they were knocked to the ground by the baseball bat. Before they could stand firmly, Feng Ling took the opportunity to stand up, subdued them, pressed them to the ground, and completely imprisoned them. "Thank you." After subduing the 3 men, Feng Ling ignored the blood on her body and turned her head to look at Jin Wan, who was holding a baseball bat in her hand. Seeing that she was injured, Jin Wan quickly stepped forward and checked the wounds and blood on her body with concern. Seeing that Feng Ling's cheeks seemed to be scratched, her neck was bruised, and the corners of her mouth were stained with blood, Jean Wan reached out to take her arm. How are you? Are you seriously injured? I'm fine. It's just a minor injury. Fong Ling didn't shake off Jean Wan's hand but used her other hand to hit the back of the men's necks again. After being ruthlessly hit in the back of the neck, which was the weakest part, the three men immediately fainted and lay on the ground motionlessly. With Jean Wan's support, Fong Ling stood up. Seeing that Fong Ling seemed to be injured and bleeding, Jean Wan frowned. What's the matter with them? Do you have any enemies in the United States? Enemies? Fong Ling glanced at the three men on the ground. Sort of. I did a lot of missions in 11 base and made a lot of enemies. You're seriously injured. Let's get out of here first. Jean Wan tugged at her hand again. Although she was usually protected by Fong Ling, now seeing that Fong Ling was injured, she had no intention of staying out of this and must take Fong Ling away from this place. Fong Ling didn't have many women around her since she was a child. If she had to find a friend of the same sex, it would probably be Wen Liqing, but she was more grateful to Wen Liqing. Fong Ling didn't know Wen Liqing, but she was more grateful to Wen Liqing. Relatively speaking, Jean Wan was definitely the weak one in front of Fong Ling. Jean Wan didn't know how to fight or use a gun, but at this moment, the feeling of being suddenly protected by a woman made Fong Ling's heart inexplicably warm. Before she could say that she was fine, she had been forcibly taken out of the alley by Jean Wan. However, just as the two of them ran out of the alley, in the car parked in front of them, an accomplice of the same tall and strong group suddenly opened the door and got out of the car, holding the same black stun baton in his hand. He rushed at them with a fierce look and cursed rudely. Watch out. At the moment when the man swung the stun baton, Jean Wan and Fong Ling almost shouted at the same time. Before Jean Wan tried to protect her behind her, Fong Ling subconsciously pulled Jean Wan behind her. She didn't forget that she was Jean Wan's bodyguard and couldn't let Jean Wan suffer any harm because of her, but the pain in her arm couldn't be ignored. The pain and numbness from the electric shock were still there. She wanted to beat the man back, but her movements were still 2 or 3 seconds slower than usual. In these 2 or 3 seconds, the man successfully grasped the timing and was about to reach out his other hand to restrain her. Fong Ling used her remaining strength to temporarily push the man back, and at the same time, she was dragged back by Jean Wan. As she ran, she looked back and noticed that the man seemed to be planning to hit them with the car. Fong Ling frowned and abruptly stopped. Mrs. Mo, you go first. She couldn't implicate Jean Wan. Why should I go? I'm not a brother from your 11 base. I don't know what sacrifice and morality are, but in my eyes, you're already a very good friend of mine. How can I leave you alone? Jean Wan reached out to pull her back. Run first. There's an alley ahead. His car can't drive in. We'll think of a way after we get in. Seeing Jean Wan's insistence, Fong Ling ran a few steps and felt that it would take at least a few days for her body to recover from the electric shock. Right now, she couldn't run as fast as usual. Today's update will show a new chapter every 1 or 2 minutes. Today, there are a total of 30 chapters, 60,000 words, and tomorrow, there will be 10 chapters, 20,000 words. It will be slowly refreshed chapter by chapter. Babies waiting for more chapters, please be patient. Chapter 1099. Just as the two of them were about to run to the entrance of another alley that Jean Wan mentioned, suddenly, a black jeep sped up from the road in front of them and slammed on the brakes with a screech sound. Fong Ling and Jean Wan raised their eyes and saw that the back door of the jeep was open from the inside out. The man in the driver's seat glanced at the blood on Fong Ling's body and said coldly, "Get in the car." As soon as she saw that the person in the car was Li Nanheng, Fong Ling froze, but Jean Wan quickly helped Fong Ling, who had been injured, into the car. When Fong Ling sat firmly in the car, she looked back and saw that Jean Wan hadn't gotten in the car yet, so she reached out to pull her. "Mrs. Mo, come on." Then the sound of the car outside was cut off, and the tense atmosphere in the air finally relaxed. Because the person who suddenly appeared here was Li Nanheng and the driver was Li Nanheng, Feng Ling knew that no matter what, she wouldn't die today. Jin Wan sat by Feng Ling's side and pulled her sleeve. "You're bleeding a lot. Do you want to go to the hospital to stop the bleeding or go somewhere else?" Just as the two of them sat in the back of the car and talked, Li Nanheng didn't look at them but just looked coldly at the car that dared to chase them. His cold face was mixed with a hint of cold killing intent, and he suddenly swerved the jeep beautifully outside the alley. The car was going to hit them, but it was caught off guard and slammed heavily into the wall of the alley, making a loud crash. Li Nanheng reversed the car again, turned the car around, and crashed into the car that was stuck against the wall. Feng Ling and Jin Wan only felt the force of the collision in the car. When they turned their eyes, they saw that the car had been directly hit into the entrance of the alley by the jeep. The car was stuck there, unable to get in or out. At the same time, the gas tank of the car had leaked, and gasoline was dripping down. If someone threw a cigarette but here at this time, the people in the car would never have a chance to survive, because when the car was hit, it was stuck in the alley. The doors on both sides were tightly stuck to the wall. The doors couldn't be opened, and the front and back windows were so solid. It was very difficult to escape from the car in a short time. Feng Ling looked up at the man in the driver's seat. She was sure that if this was not an ordinary residential area but an open field, he would throw a cigarette butt over mercilessly. But this was a residential area. If a car here spontaneously ignited and exploded, it would affect the residents of this community. The man looked coldly at the car that had been completely shackled in the alley, and at the same time, he backed the black jeep and drove it out of this community. "Feng Ling, you're bleeding too much. Let's go to the hospital," Jin Wan said worriedly. "Jin Wan," Ling Nanheng said. Without waiting for Feng Ling to speak, Li Nanheng said mildly, "Take her to my place first. I have gauze and hemostatic medicine. Jin Wan, help her bandage. Do you have a place to live in T City?" Jin Wan turned her eyes to Li Nanheng. It seemed that he had just arrived, but people like them were all cunning rabbits and had many places to live in. She said, "Is it far? My apartment is very close to here. She can go to my place to have her wound bandaged." "Forget it. We can't go there together now, in case you get into trouble." Li Nanheng spat out these words coldly and glanced at Jin Wan through the rearview mirror. "Why were you there just now? If something like this happens again, remember to run first, okay? Otherwise, if something happens to you, I'm afraid your man will chase me to the Pacific Ocean, and I won't be able to live in peace for the rest of my life." Feng Ling remained silent and just covered the part of her arm where the wound was more serious and bleeding more. Jin Wan turned back to look at her. "Are you hurt anywhere else? Don't keep silent. Tell me where it hurts. If it's too serious, just go home to have it bandaged. You have to go to the hospital to get stitches." Feng Ling shook her head, meaning that she was fine and didn't need to worry so much. Just then, they noticed that several cars were driving in the opposite direction from them. Then, in an instant, several cars drove into the residential area behind them, surrounding the car that was trapped in the alley. It was not difficult to see that they were from 11 Base. Feng Ling didn't expect that 11 Base's people could be seen so easily in China. Did Li Nanheng specially come to T City with full preparation? Did he expect that something would happen to her before he came? Did he come to help her out? Jin Wan took out a wet towel from her bag to wipe away the blood on Feng Ling's face. Seeing that Feng Ling's complexion was pale, she furrowed her brows and asked, "Someone actually dares to wield a knife in broad daylight in the country? Are there any powerful connections behind this? Can you call the police?" "The domestic police can't handle this kind of thing," Feng Ling said lightly and looked up at the man who was driving in front of her. As if feeling her gaze, Li Nanheng drove the black jeep to the main road in the traffic flow and looked at her through the rearview mirror for a moment. Feng Ling immediately looked away, but the man in the driver's seat smiled faintly and continued to drive calmly. Li Nanheng's so-called residence in Tea City was a suite on the top floor of a hotel that he had temporarily booked. No one was allowed to enter this entire floor. After arriving at the place, Jin Wan had been taking care of Feng Ling, helping her take off her clothes and dressing her wounds. Feng Ling had never experienced such a pure same-sex friendship since she was a child. She used to live like a man in the base, but now suddenly being cared for like this, she was not used to it. Can't you lift your hand now? I'll help you take it off. Don't move. Jin Wan took off Feng Ling's clothes. Feng Ling didn't refuse and took off her clothes. Fortunately, there was a conservative black sportswear inside. Jin Wan saw the wounds on her body and hurriedly turned to run into the bathroom to wash a towel and help her wipe the blood around the wounds. Li Nanheng came over with the hotel's medicine box and saw this scene. His eyes paused on Feng Ling, who was only wearing sports underwear. Before he spoke, Jin Wan had quickly come over, snatched the medicine box from his hand, and turned back to disinfect and stop the bleeding for Feng Ling. The room was very quiet. Jin Wan was bandaging Feng Ling's wounds, and suddenly it seemed that Li Nanheng, a big man, was superfluous. Jin Wan also turned to look at him from time to time, which was obviously a silent question. Feng Ling was sitting here wearing so little. How could a big man like him have the nerve to watch by the side? Perhaps because Jin Wan's look was too obvious, Li Nanheng coughed and went out. Chapter 1100. After treating Feng Ling's wound, Jin Wan rummaged for a black t-shirt that Li Nanheng had worn and put it on her. After a while, Li Nanheng came in again. Seeing that Jin Wan had squatted down to treat the wound on Feng Ling's leg, he raised his eyebrows and chuckled. You're quite thoughtful. Miss Ji is much more useful than before. Jin Wan silently rolled her eyes at the disinfectant in her hand, thinking that Li Nanheng wanted to bandage Feng Ling's wound himself but couldn't do it, so he was angry with her. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Mo Jingshan came. Jin Wan, who had been cold to Mo Jingshan for a long time because of something, turned her eyes to the door with a jerk and was a little surprised. Who is it? Li Nanheng glanced at her surprised expression. Don't think too much. I just went out and called Mo Jingshan. He happened to be nearby. Who do you think will come now? Jin Wan. Your man is here. Are you going to open the door or should I? Li Nanheng now felt that Jin Wan was too conspicuous in front of Feng Ling, so he couldn't get close to her. If he didn't mention Mo Jingshan, Feng Ling would probably leave with Jin Wan without saying a word to him. The man just stood there. Although his tall figure blocked the door, he couldn't block the sound coming from the other side of the door, and he looked like he was about to laugh. The door rang for a while. The great Mr. Mo had been blocked by the door for so long. Jin Wan was in a dilemma. Feng Ling looked at them, suddenly put down the leg that was being treated, and said, "Let me open the door." Li Nanheng glanced at her coldly. "Don't be nosy." Feng Ling's expression faltered. Ever since the last time in the hotel, he kept calling her his wife, causing her heart to be in a mess. Those emotions that she couldn't control made her instinctively want to avoid him. However, she didn't need to avoid him. He never appeared again. Now he suddenly appeared here. Feng Ling didn't say anything but pretended not to hear him and turned to Jin Wan. "Mr. Mo must have come to see you. Go open the door. The wound on my leg is not serious. I can do it myself." Jin Wan wiped her hands and got up to open the door. While Jin Wan was busy dealing with Mo Jingshan, Li Nanheng stood in the room and looked at Feng Ling, who was trying to apply medicine on her own. He walked over, picked up the anti-inflammatory and hemostatic ointment in front of her, lowered his body, bent over, and applied the ointment evenly on the wounds on her legs that were not serious but not too light. Because the man's fingertips were stained with ointment and touched her wound, the pain that she had been enduring just now seemed to be piercing her heart. She sat there silently and didn't move, just looking at her leg. "You've been injured a lot since you were a child. Why can't you remember that when the enemy has a weapon and you don't have a weapon, you should be good at using everything you can to resist, instead of your own arms and legs? You're made of flesh and blood. How can you resist those knives and guns? Li Nanheng said like a worrisome elder as he helped her apply the ointment. Perhaps it was because the man only mentioned how she should block other people's weapons. Feng Ling's voice was slightly hoarse as she said, "It's easy for you to say." At that time, there wasn't even a stone on the ground in the alley. There were walls on both sides. What could I use to block? Li Nanheng raised his head. He held the ointment in one hand and placed the other on her leg. I've taught you how to untie belts so many times. Those people just now all have belts on them. Don't you know how to pull off their belts and beat them? Feng Ling, what? Wasn't he the one who forcefully pressed down on her hand to undo his belt? How could she think of such a way at that time? At this time, Mo Jingshan had come in, but he clearly had more important things to talk about with Mrs. Mo. He glanced at her wound, made sure that it was only a skin wound and not serious, and turned to go next door. Jean Wan was about to walk to Feng Ling when Feng Ling turned to say, "Speaking of which, if Mrs. Mo hadn't helped me today, I wouldn't have been able to escape so smoothly." She actually said this to Mr. Mo next door. They had been in a cold war recently, and now Jean Wan was almost in trouble because of her. If she didn't quickly help Jean Wan out, Mr. Mo's eyes would probably be sharp enough to kill her. Jean Wan simply avoided all of them and went into the kitchen to find water to drink. Li Nanheng glanced expressionlessly at the kitchen and then at Feng Ling. "Is that so? Then as a bodyguard, you're going to lose your job, right? Do you want to go back to America with me, back to the base?" Feng Ling, no. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. Before he spoke, Jean Wan, who had a strong sense of presence today, came out of the kitchen to pour water for Feng Ling and fed it to her. At the same time, she said, "Yes, I'm not going back. Feng Ling is fine by my side. Why go back to the base in America? What's so good about being with a group of men and suffering? And even if I don't completely need a bodyguard, I still need a good sister by my side. Don't you think so, Feng Ling?" Perhaps Jean Wan's soft and tough character was really infected by Feng Ling, who was usually as hard as a rock. Feng Ling looked at Jean Wan and smiled. Seeing Feng Ling smile at Jean Wan, Li Nanheng's heart skipped a beat. It seemed that after being with Jean Wan for a long time, Feng Ling had gained a lot of feelings that she had never had before, such as patience and gentleness. "Does it hurt?" Jean Wan saw a red and swollen area around Feng Ling's ankle and bent down to touch it. "No," Feng Ling answered with a smile. At this time, Mo Jingshan came out from next door. Watching the two of them acting like sisters, the two men who were completely ignored exchanged a silent look. Not long after, Jean Wan was still led into the kitchen by Mo Jingshan, and the kitchen door was abruptly closed. Glancing at the kitchen door that was closed, Feng Ling sat in her original position without moving, but then she remembered that she had been driving outside to avoid that group of people for the past 2 days. Her cell phone was almost out of battery. She didn't know if her cell phone was broken during the fight earlier. She was about to reach out to take out her cell phone from her pocket when suddenly, a familiar cool smell came to her nose. She raised her head abruptly and almost hit Li Nanheng's chin. She saw the man suddenly bent down and picked her up from the sofa. Her feet suddenly left the ground, and she subconsciously looked at him. "What are you doing?" Chapter 11:01. As she spoke, Feng Ling carefully moved her head back to avoid pressing against his chin, which would be too intimate. "Don't you know what the husband and wife are doing in the kitchen? You're only separated by a wall. Don't you feel awkward?" The man's voice was indifferent and he spoke matter-of-factly. He carried her to another bedroom next to this suite and placed Feng Ling on the bed. As soon as her body touched the bed, Feng Ling shrank back. However, her body was injured and it was inconvenient for her to make any big movements. She only shrank back twice and sat in the middle of the bed, looking at the man by the bed with some wariness in her eyes. Earlier, he had noticed that she seemed to want to take out something from her pocket. Li Nanheng leaned down and Feng Ling immediately looked at him warily. However, the man only took out the phone from her pocket. She saw that this phone was still a model from 2 or 3 years ago. It was a waterproof tablet phone. It was black, unlike the pink and white models that young girls like to buy nowadays. To Feng Ling, a phone was only used for communication. Except for her short hair, she was a girl from head to toe, but she really did not have a girl's heart at all. Playing with the phone that was about to run out of battery, Li Nanheng glanced at her again. Feng Ling raised her hand to take the phone, but the man raised his hand slightly. "I'll help you charge it. Be good and rest here. You can't move around with your injuries. I didn't bring a charger, there will be one at the hotel front desk. I'll ask them to send it over according to your phone model." As Li Nanheng spoke, he took her cell phone out of the bedroom. Within 10 minutes, he brought in a charging cable that could charge her cell phone and charged it on the socket beside her bed. Feng Ling did not speak. She glanced at her phone and then at the quilt by the side. Li Nanheng understood and reached out to cover her with the quilt. As she was sitting against the headboard, the quilt could only cover her lower abdomen, and her upper body was still outside. The man sat by the bed and looked at the little woman who was wearing his clothes again after such a long time. She was wearing his short-sleeved t-shirt. The loose t-shirt seemed to be too big on her body, and at the same time, it made her arms seem even more slender. However, her fair and slender arms were covered with wounds of varying depths and were red and swollen. "I see that you are very close to Jin Wan now. What, do you like her very much?" Li Nanheng helped her pull up the quilt. His tone of speaking while sitting on the bed made it seem as if there were no grudges or conflicts between the two of them. It was just a simple conversation without any emotions mixed in. "Mrs. Mo is very good to me, and Mr. Mo is also very good. I'm very happy working here. Mrs. Mo is very easygoing and frank. She is the kind of person that people can easily befriend after spending a long time with. It's rare for me to accept a new friend, but this new friend is very good," Feng Ling answered calmly. Li Nanheng looked at her and suddenly turned sideways to approach her. He placed his hands on both sides of her body and pressed her against the headboard in an oppressive manner. Feng Ling looked at him warily. Before she spoke, the man's breath had already brushed against her nose, causing her to clench her hands on her lap. The two were too close. The man lowered his eyes to look at her. "So, are you going to stay in China forever? You won't return to 11 base, en?" Looking at the man's incomparably handsome face that was magnified in front of her due to the close distance, Feng Ling did not even blink and directly said, "I cherish my current job very much. If Mr. Mo doesn't intend to fire me, I won't leave." Li Nanheng snorted. "How long have you been with Jin Wan? Have you already fallen in love with her? As long as they don't let you go, you won't leave? If King treated you with sincerity and kindness for so many years, and in the end, how did you treat me? You have a conscience to them, but why can't you have a conscience to me?" Feng Ling's expression didn't change. "You have a wife. If my heart is not good enough, I will do something out of line. Boss Li, you'd better put your heart and mind on your wife. There's no need to provoke me." Li Nanheng immediately raised his eyebrows and sneered. "Jealous?" Feng Ling put on a straight face and looked at him coldly. "You think too much." Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at her and smiled faintly. He did not continue to interrogate her at this time. He stepped back and helped her pull up the quilt. "Do you want to lie down or sit here to rest for the time being? I think it will take a while for Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan to finish. Just like this. There's no need to lie down." Li Nanheng didn't do anything else to her. He got up and walked out. "I'll go outside to see what's going on. If you're jealous, hold it in. I'll ask the hotel to make some dumplings and send them up tonight." I don't think I need to be jealous. I can just watch you. Feng Ling. She suddenly raised her eyes to look at the man who had stood up and walked to the bedroom door. Seeing that he had closed the door and left, she suddenly grabbed the pillow behind her, ignored the pain of the wound on her arm, and threw the pillow over. Originally, it should have hit the door. Anyway, the pillow was so soft that it couldn't make any sound. However, at this moment, the man pushed open the door that hadn't been completely closed. The moment he turned around and was about to speak, the pillow hit his chest. Li Nanheng caught the pillow that suddenly fell from the sky, raised his eyebrows, and glanced at her. Feng Ling looked at him silently and coldly. The man pinched the pillow in his arms and suddenly smiled at her meaningfully. She was so angry that her forehead was throbbing. Shameless. He was too shameless. She just couldn't figure out why her heart, which had always been as calm as still water, was suddenly in such turmoil recently. Previously, when she found out that he was married, her heart felt like it was dead, and she didn't feel much. However, ever since he pressed her into his arms and kept calling her his wife, she had been on tenterhooks. Her heart hadn't been able to calm down. Now that she saw him, she wished that what she had thrown at him was not just a pillow but a grenade. Blow up this scumbag of a beast. Li Nanheng smiled and threw the pillow back to her, which landed by Feng Ling's bed. Feng Ling ignored the pillow and retracted her gaze. She planned to close her eyes and lean against the headboard to rest for a while. However, she suddenly heard the man in front of the door say with a faint smile, "Are you hungry? Do you want me to get you a plate of dumplings now?" Feng Ling abruptly grabbed the pillow that had just been thrown back. She resisted the urge to throw it at him again and turned to look at him. The moment the man received her sharp gaze, he smiled, closed the door, and left. Feng Ling silently pinched the corner of the pillow and stared at the closed door. Chapter 1102. So, it turned out that in the past month, he had gone to solve those things? How did he solve them? This man always did everything without batting an eyelid. Jean Wan had thought that he was simply angry with her and gave her the cold shoulder for a month. It turned out that he was actually so decisive. She suddenly lowered her eyes. For a moment, she didn't even know what she was angry about. In the past month, had she calmed down? She had indeed calmed down, and she was way too calm. She glanced at Immerse again. "On my birthday, you were the one who made the cake. Why didn't you tell me?" As she spoke, she puffed up her cheeks unhappily, but this unhappiness didn't come from anger. Instead, she was annoyed that because of what happened in her previous life, she was too subjective and defensive when looking at certain things. Instead, she neglected too much warmth and detail. Perhaps, she was only annoyed. "You still know that I made those cakes? When I cut them one by one, I didn't see your heart ache," the man said half-jokingly, stroking her hand. "You're not angry anymore, En? What was there to be angry about?" Jean Wan wasn't that unreasonable. She wouldn't give up a good man. Was she really going to give up this piece of meat to someone else? She wasn't a masochist. Jean Wan suddenly pulled down one of his hands that was leaning against the wall behind her. She held his palm that was much larger than her own. It was hard to imagine how he had the energy to make so many cakes for her that day. Whether it was the cream or the base cake, the taste was especially sweet and soft. This man could do everything so well. He was really impeccable. She held his hand in her palm and then held his slender fingers, whispering, "Then what do you want as compensation?" Mo Jingshan looked at her, and his eyes were full of smiles. He held her hand, lowered his head to kiss it, and then leaned over to kiss her lips. He pressed his lips against hers and said hoarsely in a low voice, "What do you think I need as compensation?" Jean Wan's body immediately softened from his kiss. She pursed her lips and said, "How about I make 21 dishes for you tonight? After you're done, you're going to throw them away right in front of me? Am I that childish?" "You mean I'm childish?" Jean Wan hadn't cooked for a long time, not even since she came to Tea City. Now she was trying to make up for her mistake and give him a chance to take revenge, but he didn't appreciate her kindness, so he couldn't blame her for this. She was not to blame. Suddenly, a few dong-dong sounds came from the wall outside the kitchen. Nanhang knocked on the wall a few times. You two, don't go too far. You've been in there for so long. Do you need me to take Feng Ling away and leave this room to you? Jean Wan subconsciously tugged on Mo Jingshan's hand, rushing to leave. However, Mo Jingshan did not move. He pulled her back and took the opportunity to hold the little woman who was leaning against the wall to maintain a distance from him. He whispered by her ear, "Giving up the room to us is not a bad choice." Jean Wan, she pressed her hand against his chest. Feng Ling was just injured, and it's clear that she's being chased by some unknown force. After all, she's someone you hired. You have to be concerned about her safety. How can there be such a cold-blooded boss like you? With Nanhang here, she doesn't need my concern. His words were simple and straightforward, and then he seemed to be warning and commanding, in the future, if there are any illegal activities with unknown pursuers or foreigners, you're not allowed to approach. Although Feng Ling is good at martial arts, her background isn't simple. When the situation is tense, what you have to do is to take care of yourself first, understand? Today, when Jean Wan rushed into the alley with a baseball bat, it was probably because Feng Ling was among the people inside that she thought Feng Ling could handle it, so she had the courage to rush in to help. Of course, she had the awareness to protect herself, but she wasn't too weak. It was not Jean Wan's style to hide when something happened. Of course, she wouldn't let others worry about her. I know. When it's cold, I don't see you. When it's good, you come to manage me like a housekeeper, Jean Wan muttered. Mo Jingshan, when Jean Wan walked out of the kitchen, she saw that Feng Ling had put on her black sports coat. If it weren't for the fact that she was only wearing underwear inside and couldn't take it off, she would most likely have changed out of Nanhang's black t-shirt. She saw Feng Ling sitting on the sofa with the coat on, as though the person who was injured earlier was not her. Except for her complexion being paler than usual, there was no difference. Was this the reason she had received training? She couldn't even cry out in pain and had to endure all kinds of feelings as though they had never happened. You're finally willing to come out. I thought the two of you would stay in my kitchen until the end of time. Nanhang leaned against the wall outside the kitchen door with a cold smile. His eyes glanced at Jean Wan's expression, which had softened a lot. He didn't need to guess to know that this little woman had most likely been coaxed. Mo Jingshan placed his hand on Jean Wan's waist, encircling the little woman who was about to head to the sofa in his arms to stop her from running away. He glanced at Feng Ling and the medicine box by her feet, and then his gaze fell on Nanhang. They went around in such a big circle. Is their target her or you? Nanhang's expression was indifferent and lazy. We're all people who work in 11 base. Their biggest target is either me or her. What's the difference? Mo Jingshan looked at him and said indifferently, your own woman has been injured to such a state. Right now, you clearly want to personally uproot the nest of those pieces of trash, but now you can lean against here and smile as though nothing happened. Even Jean Wan isn't as big-hearted as you. Nanhang, Jean Wan? What did this have to do with her? Mr. Mo, I'm not his woman. Although you're my current boss, please don't randomly put labels on me, Feng Ling spoke up, protesting unhappily. However, Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He only coldly glanced at Nanhang. Nanhang was silent for several seconds, temporarily withdrawing his lazy attitude. These days, women are not easy to raise. Whether they're light or heavy is a mistake. Keeping them by your side is a mistake. Letting them out is also a mistake. Jean Wan did not understand his words. Sitting on the sofa, Feng Ling's expression turned cold. Chapter 1103. After hanging up the phone, Li Nanheng opened the door and went to the bedroom. Feng Ling had already woken up. What do you want to eat? Li Nanheng turned on the bedroom light. Feng Ling slowly sat up on the bed and turned to look at the sky outside the window. What time is it? 4:00 in the afternoon. You haven't eaten anything since noon. Your current boss, Missouri Jingshan, said that you should have a good rest here and don't have to accompany Jin Wan. Feng Ling raised her hand to take the cell phone, but it was difficult for her to do so because of the injury on her arm. Li Nanheng came over to take the cell phone for her and handed it to her. She took a look at it and found that it was really past 4:00. What do you want to eat? The man asked patiently. There's nothing delicious. Feng Ling was not very comfortable because of her injury. It was uncomfortable to move even a little, but she didn't want to lie in bed all the time. She slowly moved her body to get out of bed. Li Nanheng knew that she didn't like to lie all the time, so he reached out to help her. Come on, slow down. The man's gentle and patient voice made Feng Ling turn to look at him. Their eyes met, and Li Nanheng looked at her. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? No. Feng Ling didn't say much. She walked out of the bedroom, sat down in the living room of this suite, and then looked around. There were several other rooms here. Even if she really listened to Mr. Mo's arrangement and recuperated here temporarily, Li Nanheng shouldn't be so beastly as to do anything to her. Due to their work and occupation, they were often injured. In the past, she had recuperated in Li Nanheng's place. This seemingly cold and domineering man always seemed to have a knack for taking care of her. She was used to it. She glanced at the injury on her arm and asked, when should I change the dressing? At 8:00, simply scrub and change the dressing. After that, lie down and sleep. Li Nanheng casually threw the medicine box on the coffee table. Feng Ling saw that there were several kinds of good wound medicine in the medicine box. She guessed that he had asked someone to buy them when she accidentally fell asleep in the bedroom. People who came from 11 base always dealt with their wounds by themselves. At most, they would go to Dr. Wen in the base. Otherwise, they would just apply some medicine and wouldn't go to the hospital. Everyone was very good at bandaging. Even Feng Ling had gradually gained some experience in bandaging, not to mention Boss Li, who had been in the base for so many years. He said to change the dressing at 8:00, so he had to wait until 8:00. What should he do now? She didn't want to go back to sleep, and she didn't want to stay with him, like this. Originally, Feng Ling was not hungry, but perhaps it was because she had just woken up and felt that she was not hungry, but her stomach was already growling. Li Nanheng glanced at her and repeated the previous question. What do you want to eat? Apart from dumplings, anything is fine. Feng Ling pressed her stomach, her expression clearly unhappy. Li Nanheng smiled. I heard that the dumplings in this hotel are not bad. They are handmade. I'm not eating. Then what do you want to eat? Feng Ling stood up from the sofa and slowly walked a few steps. She really didn't want to stay in the same room with him, but if she went out alone at this time, she would either cause trouble for Li Nanheng or Mr. Mo, and it was not the time to be willful and mischievous. Feng Ling walked to the window and looked out. She saw a gourmet restaurant not far away. She said, Mrs. Mo passed by this place with me some time ago. We ate at this gourmet restaurant. There's a noodle shop here that serves pretty good rice noodles. You like to eat rice noodles? I didn't eat it in the United States before. After coming to China, I tasted a lot of new things and found that rice noodles are very delicious. Feng Ling answered and turned to look at him. Can I eat rice noodles? Of course. Li Nanheng picked up the phone. I'll ask them to pack it up for you. No, I want to go out to eat by myself. Li Nanheng glanced at her. You still want to go out with such injuries? It's just a skin wound. I'm very energetic after sleeping for an afternoon. As long as I walk slowly and don't pull my wounds, I'll be fine. You know I'm used to exercising. It's uncomfortable to keep me in the room. Seeing that she insisted, he knew that she was trying to avoid the awkwardness of being in the same room with him. After waking up, she seemed to be in a much better state. As long as she wore long-sleeved clothes, the wounds on her arms and legs could be covered. Except for her slightly pale face, there was nothing unusual. Li Nanheng urged someone to send the clothes he had arranged for someone to buy for her. He asked Feng Ling to go back to the room to change and took her out. Feng Ling's legs still hurt when she walked, but it didn't affect her. When they walked into the elevator, Li Nanheng looked down at the little woman who was leaning against the wall of the elevator with a pale face. "Didn't you say it doesn't hurt? Didn't you say you can endure it? It's not too late to ask someone to pack it up and send it up. No need." He was as stubborn as ever for 8 years. Li Nanheng resisted the urge to rub her hair, put his hand in his trouser pocket, and sighed helplessly and indulgently. If he touched her at this time, even if it was just a strand of her hair, she would probably explode in anger. In the past, he felt uncomfortable because she was always suppressing her emotions and being too calm, but now he finally knew how to provoke her. She was indeed aroused by the slightest provocation. If he wanted to coexist peacefully and lure her heart back, he still needed some countermeasures. Although Tea City was about to enter winter and the weather was very cold, it was like a city that never slept. It was nearly 5:00 in the evening and the wind was very strong. The cold wind blew on her face like a knife and drilled into her neck. The coat Li Nanheng asked someone to buy for her was warm, but the person in charge of buying the clothes forgot to buy a scarf. Seeing her neck being blown by the wind, the man who was walking beside her suddenly stretched out his long arm and took her into his arms. He opened his coat and wrapped Feng Ling. The man was so much taller than her, and his coat was open enough to cover her exposed neck under the cold wind. Feng Ling stiffened and wanted to push him away, but she couldn't use too much strength in her arms and legs, or her wounds would hurt. She resisted as she walked, but the man held her tighter when she resisted. "Don't make trouble. Do you want to get hurt and catch a cold?" Feng Ling had to be held by him and turned to look at the road opposite the hotel. At this time, the street lights were lined up, illuminating the entire night sky above her head. There were many shops near the hotel, and all kinds of things were available. They were getting closer and closer to the food city she wanted to go to. Although the food city was only 1 street away from her, it would only take more than 10 minutes to walk there. Li Nanheng seemed to be afraid that she would really freeze, so he reached out to hail a taxi and opened the door. "Go in." You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.